Hey guys, tonight we're stepping way back, like powdered wigs and plague level back, to figure out what Amish life was really like in the 1600s. Spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this, and neither would I. There's famine, religious persecution, no antibiotics, and you're wearing wool underwear in July. But that's the gig. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know your city and what time you're watching this. Always cool to see who's tuning in from where. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're in the jagged hills of Switzerland. The year is 1693, and you've made the bold, nearly suicidal choice to follow a man named Jakob Ammann. This guy's not a soldier or a king, he's a tailor-turned-preacher with a strong beard and even stronger opinions. He's preaching simplicity, humility, and a total rejection of worldly pleasures, like buttons. Yes, really, buttons are the devil's fasteners. Hooks and eyes only, thank you. You're standing in a cold barn pressed between a dozen other families. The air thick with the stink of hay, damp wool, and fear. Because what you're doing here? Completely illegal, see? You're now a part of a growing group called the Swiss Brethren, a spin-off of the Anabaptist movement. You baptize adults. You believe in non-violence. You don't want to serve in any military, which means to everyone else in 17th century Europe, including the Reformed Church and the Holy Roman Empire, you're basically a walking felony. Some Anabaptists have already been drowned as punishment for their radical belief in adult baptism. Irony not lost, trust me. Others are burned at the stake. And that's not even counting what the locals do to you if they catch you preaching without a license, or refusing to swear loyalty to the state. You've heard stories, families tortured, children taken away, property seized. So yeah, you keep your voice down, you listen, you pray, and you look over your shoulder a lot. Jakob Ammann's not content with just hiding out. He wants a community that lives pure, separate from the world, and obedient to what he sees as true biblical living. And if that means cutting ties with lukewarm Anabaptists, he's fine with it. This is the infamous shunning Meidung. If someone disobeys church rules and refuses to repent, they're cut off completely. No eating with them, no helping them, no eye contact. You're out, in or out, no middle ground. There's a quiet crackle of tension in the barn tonight because some of the elders aren't totally on board with Jakob's vision. Some think the shunning goes too far. Others aren't thrilled about ditching nice coats and metal buttons. There's a murmur of dissent, but not much. Too dangerous. And you? You're not sure either, but you've seen what happens to people who say the wrong thing. Out in the fields, it's getting colder. You work sun up to sun down, because there's no other way to survive. You till hard soil with wooden plows, yank stones from the earth with your bare hands, and pray for enough rain but not too much. There's no tractor coming to help you. No convenience store around the corner. The cows are your alarm clock. Your wife? She's just as exhausted as you are, scrubbing laundry in icy water, baking over open flames, raising 5 kids under 10. In some places, local rulers are semi-tolerant of Anabaptists because you're ridiculously productive. You pay your taxes, you don't start fights, and you're kind of the ideal peasant, minus the whole refuses to swear allegiance thing. But that tolerance can vanish overnight. All it takes is one paranoid bishop or angry neighbour to accuse you of heresy, and suddenly you're dodging arrest warrants again. So when whispers begin, whispers about a place across the sea where religious misfits can worship freely, your ears perk up. Penn's Woods, they say. Pennsylvania. Founded by a rich Quaker who promises land, freedom, and the chance to start fresh. But getting there? Not so simple. You have to gather your things, sell what you can, and then disappear. No public goodbyes, no drawn-out farewells. Just one morning you're gone, off on foot carrying bags of dried food, old tools, and maybe a carved wooden cross in your coat lining. You hike through dense forests and snowy mountain passes, avoiding roads patrolled by soldiers. If you're lucky, you meet up with others. If not, you hide during the day and travel by moonlight. Here's where it gets quirky. Some families sew tiny Bibles into the lining of their coats. Others smuggle hymn books hidden inside loaves of bread. You've got secret maps, coded messages, and a lot of prayers. Think Underground Railroad. Oh, but for bonnet-wearing farmers with calves of steel. Meanwhile, the theological drama doesn't take a break. There is still major debate within your group. Should children be excommunicated if they disobey the Ordnung, the unwritten rulebook of Amish life? How far is too far when it comes to separating from the world? Ammann himself eventually gets shunned by his own followers after some extreme decisions. Yes, the guy who invented shunning gets shunned. Can't make this up. By now, you're committed. Or maybe just desperate. Either way, you're about to leave everything you've ever known behind. The villages, the fields, the dialect, the food, even the graveyards. You've never seen an ocean, never ridden a ship, and frankly, you're not sure God meant for humans to float. But the alternative is staying, and probably dying. So you keep walking, with blisters on your feet, hope in your heart, and the creeping realization that you may never see your homeland again. You've made it to the edge of the known world, or at least the edge of the Holy Roman Empire, and if you squint, you can almost pretend this next step isn't going to be a complete nightmare. But it is, because before you can sail to that promised land, you've got to cross a political patchwork that makes modern airport security look like a cakewalk. Welcome to the Catholic-controlled territories of Central Europe. You're Amish, you're illegal, and now you're going to try to move through lands patrolled by people who would very much like to see you jailed, fined, or dead. Neat. Your journey takes you through tiny principalities, bishoprics and duchies, each with its own ruler, its own language dialect, and its own set of weird border taxes. This isn't go to the next town simple. This is negotiate with a suspicious gatekeeper. Bribe a ferryman and maybe lie through your teeth hard. You speak Swiss German, but here they speak something closer to Bavarian or Latin, and you definitely don't have Google Translate. Your best weapon is silence. Amish people have already been perfecting the art of quiet invisibility for years. Now it's survival. You travel in small groups. Too large and you draw attention. Too small and you're vulnerable to bandits. So you cluster, 3 or 4 families walking close but not too close. Ox carts creak behind you, full of what little you could carry. Iron cookware, wooden tools, quilts, sacks of grain, and probably some anxious chickens. Every bump in the road feels like a test from God. You pray constantly. You're not even halfway to the coast and already you've had to hide in a barn loft, lie to a border guard, and run from a mob of kids throwing stones at the heretics. And here's the kicker. Most of the people you pass think you're just poor farmers. You don't wear flashy clothes. You don't scream your beliefs in public squares. You just don't conform. And in a world built entirely on conformity, that makes you dangerous. You refuse military service. You don't baptize babies. You won't even swear an oath in court. To the powers that be, that's not religious freedom. It's sedition. And to some regular villagers, you're practically in a cult. One guy even accuses you of worshipping the moon. You're not sure where he got that from, but you're too busy dodging rocks to correct him. Sometimes local Anabaptists offer you shelter for the night. You sleep in haylofts or root cellars, whispering prayers while mice scamper across your blanket. Other nights you just collapse in the woods. The kids are scared. The elderly complain about sore joints. And you, of course, are deeply aware that you still have hundreds of miles to go before you even see the sea. Food is a patchwork too. You trade, you forage, you ration. You make a kind of journey stew, whatever you can find tossed in a pot over a tiny fire. Carrots, onions, dried beans, sometimes salted pork, sometimes nothing at all. Your stomach is a constant low growl, and the water? Questionable at best. You boil when you can, otherwise you just pray your immune system is stronger than whatever's floating in that river. Let's pause and appreciate something weird. The sheer logistics of what you're doing. Remember, you don't use maps. You're relying on hand-copied directions passed down by others who made it out. Or word of mouth from traders who aren't always trustworthy. Some people have little hand-drawn guides stitched inside their coat linings showing where a friendly household might be. Others carry coded phrases. The miller's wheel turns toward the west might mean follow the river. It's all delightfully cryptic, unless you're lost. Then it's just terrifying. One night a man in your group falls ill. Fever, coughing, delirium. Could be pneumonia. Could be something worse. The group debates what to do, leave him, wait it out. Someone suggests an herbal tea, someone else offers a healing prayer. The children stay quiet, wide-eyed, watching. In the end, you stay. It cost you 3 precious days. But that's what community means here. You can't just abandon your people. And sure, he recovers, but now you're even further behind, and winter's breath is starting to brush your neck. And then there are the philosophical fights, not loud, not dramatic, but real. Should you trust this Quaker fellow, William Penn? He's not Amish, not even Anabaptist. And you're about to risk your life on the promise that he really means it when he says you can live in peace over there. Some think it's too good to be true. Others argue it's God's hand making a way. A few grumble that if Ammann were still leading them directly, they'd already have an answer. But Ammann's been quiet lately. Some even say he's disappeared. Rumours fly. Was he arrested? Dead? Secretly joined a monastery? No one knows for sure. And now you're leading yourselves. All this while walking dozens of miles each week on roads that aren't even roads, just glorified muddy paths through fields and forests. You get stuck. You get lost. A wheel breaks, and you spend an entire afternoon carving a new one with a borrowed hatchet and a prayer. But finally you reach a river town where the ships sail out. You can smell the salt in the air, or maybe that's just low tide and fish guts. Either way, it means you're almost there. Almost. Because now you've got to deal with the next level of bureaucracy. Port authorities. Paperwork, fees, waiting lists. You don't have proper identification, obviously. No one's handing out passports to illegal religious exiles. But the shipping agent doesn't care what you believe. He cares if you can but can pay. So you cough up everything you've saved. Coins, silver spoons, even a prized copper kettle. Some families offer indentured labour contracts, signing up to work off the fare once they arrive. It's desperate. It's humiliating. But it's also the only way on the boat. You watch as crates are loaded, ropes are pulled, sails are checked. You're herded like livestock onto the lower deck, cramped, dark, damp. It smells like old wood. Unwashed bodies and sickness. You haven't even left yet, and already someone's vomiting. Kids cry, rats scurry. There are no beds, just rough boards, and you're about to be sealed inside this floating wooden coffin for months. And here's the scholarly twist. Historians still debate exactly how many Amish or Anabaptists made this trek in the late 17th century. Some say only a handful went early, trickling in before the big waves of migration. Others argue entire communities vanished into this underground exodus, ghosting their way out of Europe and reappearing on the American frontier. Records are spotty. Ship manifests weren't always accurate. Some names were changed to avoid persecution. So even now historians argue about whether you're part of a brave minority, or one of many whose journey was lost to time. Either way, you're on the boat now, and there's no turning back. The smell hits you first. You haven't even left port, and already the air in the lower deck is thick with sour breath, mildew, and something deeply unpleasant that you pray is just rotten cabbage. You're packed in shoulder to shoulder with other families, some Anabaptists like you, others just poor souls trying to escape war, famine, or both. There's a family from Alsace crammed in beside yours, and their toddler has already peed on your bundle of spare shirts. This is your life now. The ship re-aches and groans as it pushes off from the dock. You feel a lurch in your stomach, part fear, part sea motion, part realization that the last shred of your old world just disappeared behind you. You're not sure how many weeks this will take, 6, 8, more. That all depends on the wind, the weather, and how much God is feeling merciful this season. Spoiler, it's not going to be much. Below deck there's no privacy, no beds. You get a slab of rough wood to lie on, if you're lucky. Some sleep sitting up. Others make nests out of straw and coats. There's one bucket for waste, one for 50 people. You make a mental note never to use it after the third day when it becomes sentient and angry. Food is ladled out from a big barrel. Usually some hard biscuit, a spoon of porridge, and a slab of something vaguely resembling meat. Everything tastes like sea salt and sadness. Water is rationed. Some families bring dried apples or root vegetables, but that runs out fast. Etc. You eat sparingly, drink less, and silently pray you don't get sick. But you do. Everyone does. Within days, people start coughing. One child develops a rash. Someone starts vomiting, then another. There's no medicine, no doctor. Just folk remedies passed down through whispers, crushed garlic, vinegar-soaked cloth, a mixture of herbs wrapped in linen and tied around the neck like a charm. Some people try to exorcise the sickness with prayer circles. Others just weep. You try not to breathe too deeply. Meanwhile, above deck, the sailors are loud, crude, and not particularly fond of holy folk. They call you stiff coats and ghosts behind your back. Some make jokes about throwing the Anabaptists overboard to calm the storms. You don't respond. You're used to being mocked. Still, when you climb above deck for fresh air, you keep your head down. Then comes the storm. It hits in the second week, somewhere in the mid-Atlantic. The ship lists hard, throwing people against the walls of the hold. Barrels roll loose. Screams echo in the dark. Water pours down from the hatches. You clutch your children, your belongings, your breath. For a moment, you think the ship might split in half. Lightning flashes, thunder shakes your teeth, and the captain yells something about jettisoning cargo. You pray again, louder this time, not just for survival, but for mercy, and maybe, just maybe, for land. You survive. Barely, but not everyone does. One child, two elders, and a woman who was already frail when she boarded. They don't make it. There's no ceremony, no burial. Just quiet murmurs, and then a splash as bodies are tipped overboard. The children stop asking questions after that. Now comes the dread monotony. Weeks of grey waves, grey skies, and the same mealy rations. Your clothes start to rot from salt and damp. Lice spread. Arguments break out over space, over food, over whose turn it is to use the slop bucket. But you hold fast, because you're not just enduring this for survival, you're enduring it for a promise. William Penn's promise. Penn is a name passed quietly from bunk to bunk, almost like a talisman. He's the Quaker founder of Pennsylvania, a man who supposedly believes that everyone has the right to worship freely, even you. That he's given land to religious exiles, that he's met with Anabaptist leaders and sworn peace. No taxes for tithes, no forced oaths, no soldiers at your door. It sounds too good to be true, but it's all you've got. There's a strange fringe story passed around during the duller hours of the voyage. It goes that a group of Amish on a previous voyage made a pact not to speak at all for the entire journey. Something about spiritual discipline or preparing for the silence of the new land. Supposedly, they didn't utter a single word for 8 weeks. No one knows if it's true, but you suspect someone started it just to get the kids to be quiet. At long last, someone shouts from above, "Land!" You stumble to the deck, squinting through the mist. It's faint, barely visible, but it's there. The American coast, wild, untamed, possibly crawling with danger, but it's not Europe, and that alone makes your knees go weak. You dock in Philadelphia, if you can call it a dock. It's more like a muddy strip with a few logs thrown together. The air smells like pine, wet wood, and the faint sweetness of unknown plants. You breathe in deep, as if you could swallow the promise this land holds. Your legs wobble as you walk onto solid ground for the first time in nearly 2 months. You've aged 5 years. You look down and realise your feet are bleeding. Immigration here isn't like the Grand Ellis Island scenes of later centuries. It's chaotic and rustic. There are no customs officers, just merchants, settlers, and land agents barking at newcomers. Penn's people are here, though. Quakers with kind eyes and wide-brimmed hats who direct you toward the next phase of your journey. Land grants. You don't get a house, you don't get supplies. What you get is a spot of land in the middle of absolutely nowhere. Marked only on a piece of parchment with a sketchy map and some encouraging words. There's scholarly debate here. Some say the early Amish immigrants settled directly into tight communities. Others argue they were scattered more loosely at first, only coming together over the decades. There's records are vague. What's clear is that you've got a plot, some tools, and nothing else. The rest, you'll build by hand. Still, it's a kind of miracle. No one's yelling at you to swear allegiance. No one's demanding you baptize your children. You could, for the first time in your life, worship openly. You could start again, but first, you need a roof, and maybe a bath, and probably a long nap that lasts 3 days. You stand on your patch of land with a map drawn by someone who's definitely never been here. It shows a stream that turns out to be more of a mosquito-infested puddle, a road that's just a deer path, and a few charming sketches of trees. Accurate because they're everywhere. Dense, towering, and in your way. Pennsylvania in 1694 is one giant forest, and now you have to clear enough of it to build a home before winter shows up and kills you. You don't get to sit down and cry, though you sort of want to. There's no town, no supply shop, no stack of lumber waiting to be hammered. You and the few families nearby, all haggard and just as clueless, start cutting trees. You borrow an axe, or share one. Some people have small hand saws, some have nothing but their bare hands and a suspicious level of optimism. This isn't a weekend cabin project, this is survival. The first thing you build isn't even your house. It's a lean-to. Poles jammed into the earth with branches for a roof and animal skins flapping for walls. If you're lucky, it keeps out the rain. If not, well, you sleep wet. Eventually you manage a log cabin, one log at a time, notched and stacked like giant Lincoln logs. It's back-breaking. Every day your palms blister, your back aches, and your muscles scream. By the time you finish the walls, you can barely lift your arms to fit the roof shingles, which are hand-split, by the way. From the trees you just cut, there are no nails, just wooden pegs. No glass windows, just oil-soaked cloth nailed into frames. No chimney, so the place fills with smoke whenever you cook. It's cosy in that smells like a smoked ham and might kill you in your sleep kind of way. There's no furniture yet. You sit on stumps, sleep on straw. Your closet is a peg on the wall, but there's something oddly comforting about it. Like every splinter and creak that means you're still here. Still free, still building a life that's truly yours. Now the real fun begins. Food. You've got a bag of seed corn, maybe some rye, a few dried beans and a small sack of flour. Not enough to feed a family through the winter. So you plant. You dig rows in rocky, unfamiliar soil with a wooden hoe and pray to the same God who got you across the Atlantic that he'll throw in a few miracles come harvest time. You also forage. Wild berries, nuts, mushrooms, though you're not entirely sure which ones won't kill you. There's debate in the camp about a particular mushroom. Half the people say it's edible, the other half swear their cousin died from it. You pass. There are deer, but hunting's not exactly encouraged in your circles, too worldly. Still, if someone finds a deer already dead, no one asks questions. You start building a root cellar to store vegetables once harvest comes, assuming it does. For now, it's mostly empty, except for a sad-looking turnip and 2 apples you're saving for Sunday. You might be wondering about the neighbours. They're out there. A few Lenape people live not far off, native tribes who've been here for generations and know the land far better than you ever will. Sometimes you see them watching from the tree line. You wave. They don't wave back. Some Amish worry, others just accept it. One man even says the Lenape are a sign from God to remind you to stay humble. Others keep their heads down and pretend not to notice. There's an awkwardness, 2 worlds brushing up against each other, both trying not to make the first wrong move. Eventually someone builds a sawmill, someone else starts a trading post with the English settlers nearby. You try not to get too close to the English, they drink, they argue, and though they swear loudly about politics and taxes, you've had enough of all that. Still, their flour is decent and they have actual spoons. And here's your little history nugget. A lot of early Amish settlers didn't speak English, not a word. They used their own dialect of German and relied on scribes or translators to handle any official business. This meant that legal documents were often misunderstood and deals didn't always go the way they expected. One poor family bought land that turned out to be swampland. The guy selling it didn't mention the snakes. Still, despite the setbacks, there's a growing sense of order. Your neighbours, those who made it across the ocean with you, start forming something like a community. You build your homes within walking distance of each other. You share tools. You take turns watching the kids while someone repairs a roof or chops firewood. You speak in quiet voices, with respect and without haste. The Ordnung, the unwritten rules that guide Amish life, starts to emerge again, not as a document, but as a shared understanding. This includes the way you build. No ornamentation, no fancy windows. Everything must be practical, plain and sturdy. It's not just a preference, it's a spiritual practice. Fancy buildings invite pride. Pride invites worldliness. Worldliness, well, that's how you ended up fleeing Europe in the first place. You worship in homes for now, no churches yet. Every other Sunday, one family volunteers to host. The benches are just planks across barrels. The preacher's pulpit, an upside-down crate, and still it feels sacred. There's something powerful about singing hymns in your own tongue, surrounded by people who survived the same horrors you did. The hymns are slow, almost droning, but there's a weight to them. You don't sing to be heard, you sing to endure, and there's debate, even here. Some say you should start building a church soon. Others argue that a church building might be too much like the outside world, too proud and lately. You don't settle it, not now, but the tension is there, lingering like smoke in the corners of the room. One evening you finally sit outside your cabin, watching the sun dip below the trees. The air smells like damp earth and wood smoke. Your hands are calloused. Your stomach is full, barely. A raccoon is trying to steal your compost, and for the first time since you left Switzerland you feel a strange flicker of peace. This is hard. Brutally, stupidly hard. But it's also yours. And for someone who was once chased out of their homeland for simply believing differently, that means everything. By now, your back has more knots than a sailing rope. Your hands are permanently stained with earth, and your boots have become a second skin, mostly because you can't afford to take them off and find out what's growing in there. But life doesn't care if you're sore, exhausted, or one bad day away from burning your homemade cabin to the ground, because now it's time for your next challenge, learning to live in a world that doesn't even remotely resemble the one you left. You're standing on the edge of your land, looking out at the wilderness beyond. The forest is dense and buzzing, and you swear the birds here scream instead of sing. Some creature, possibly bear, possibly nightmare, left claw marks on a tree not 50 paces from your front door. The local creek floods without warning, and then there's the fog, thick, wet, creeping fog that rolls in like it's trying to erase everything you've built. Still you carry on, because you have to. The weather's turning, and if you haven't stockpiled enough food and firewood, you won't make it through the winter. So you chop and dig and patch up the gaps in your walls where the wind sneaks in like a judgmental ghost. You try to fix the roof with pine pitch and leftover bark. It doesn't hold. At night, the cold sets in. You curl up with your family under a single quilt and listen to the wind press against the logs like it's trying to break in. There's always someone coughing, always someone too quiet. You try not to think about fevers or what happens if one of the babies doesn't wake up in the morning. Then comes your first Pennsylvania snowfall. You thought you knew cold. You were wrong. This cold doesn't just bite, it settles in your bones and laughs. The snow comes down so thick and fast you lose the barn for 2 full days. You and your neighbour spend hours digging out chickens who are somehow both furious and completely frozen in place. Your ox tries to kick its way through the wall of the lean-to. You don't blame it. There's a strange kind of beauty in it, though. The forest goes quiet, muffled under a blanket of white. Smoke curls from the chimneys, well, from the holes in your roofs. Everything glows with a silvery stillness. It would be peaceful if your toes weren't slowly turning into ice sculptures. And here's your fringe fact. Early Amish settlers sometimes rubbed goose-fat on their skin before bed to trap body heat. Not exactly glamorous, but when it's either that or wake up blue and dead, you lather up and thank the goose. And yes, you smell like a roasted dinner plate, but at least you're alive. The days blur. You wake, pray, work, repeat. You fix tools with bits of scrap and worn-out patience. You barter with neighbours. Milk for flour, eggs for nails. You walk 3 miles through knee-deep snow just to help someone birth a calf. When the weather breaks, you celebrate like you've been freed from prison. Then one day a rider arrives. He's muddy, half frozen, and clearly English, with that confident swagger you'd find annoying if you weren't so curious. He brings news. William Penn is sending envoys, land agents really, to check in on the settlers. You tense up. What does that mean? Inspections? Taxes? A surprise shunning for building your roof with too much flair? Turns out Penn's people actually mean what they say. You're told your land is secure. You won't be conscripted. You're welcome to worship how you like, as long as you don't stir up trouble or try to baptize the local Anglicans' babies. It feels surreal. You keep waiting for the catch, but there isn't one. At least not yet. Still, there are whispers. Some settlers are saying this freedom might not last, that Penn's health is failing, that the Crown could revoke his charter. It's all speculation, but it gnaws at you in the quiet hours. You've seen what happens when governments change their minds. You didn't survive all this just to be turned out again. And here's the scholarly debate for tonight. Historians still argue over how much direct contact the earliest Amish had with William Penn's government. Some say they were deeply engaged, sending letters and envoys. Others believe the Amish kept their distance, avoiding English institutions even then, staying as separate as possible. What's more likely? A little of both. The Amish didn't trust governments, but they did understand survival, and survival sometimes meant compromise. You start building relationships, but slowly, cautiously. There's a Mennonite family a few miles down who you visit once a month. You compare harvests, trade yarn for candles, and discuss scripture over weak tea. They're a bit less strict than you, wearing brighter clothes and using actual doorknobs, but they get it. They've seen the same fires, walked the same road. The English settlers are different, loud, curious, always trying to sell you something or debate theology with you. One man shows up at your cabin trying to sell a new miracle plow. You listen politely, say no, and then he spends 30 minutes trying to convert you to Anglicanism. You smile and hand him a jar of pickled beets just to make him leave. He takes the beets. He comes back 2 weeks later asking for the recipe. Of course he does. Meanwhile, your community is growing. Another group arrives, half frozen and limping from the port. You help them build. They bring news of more families planning to join, still trickling out of Switzerland and Germany, dodging persecution, chasing this same impossible dream. You wonder how many more will come, how long you can keep this delicate balance, separate but connected, faithful but functional. There's an idea forming now among the elders. They want to codify the Ordnung, not in writing of course, but more clearly passed down. Too many new arrivals are confused, too many small infractions are happening. Someone used a tin cup with engravings, someone wore blue, someone else trimmed their beard too neatly. It's not about punishment, they say, it's about preserving the spirit of humility. So you attend a meeting, quiet, respectful, with a lot of nodding and murmuring. You discuss modesty, technology, what it means to be of the world versus merely in it. It's not just rules, it's identity, a wall, invisible but powerful, that keeps the world at bay. You're not here just to survive anymore. You're here to remain, unchanged, unbent, and unwavering. And as you walk home through the snow, lantern swinging in your hand, you feel it settle into your bones, this strange sacred weight. You're not just a refugee anymore. You're an Amish settler carving out a life that shouldn't exist in a world that keeps trying to erase it. By now, Pennsylvania has started to feel a little less like a survival game, and a little more like something resembling a home. If you squint, ignore the weather, and pretend your outhouse isn't a crime scene every time it rains, still the land is tamed just enough that you can exhale without immediately inhaling smoke or panic. The log cabins are sturdier, the animals a bit fatter, and you've almost grown used to waking up every morning feeling like you've aged 10 years overnight. Almost. You're not alone anymore either. More families arrive with each passing season. The creek that once ran quietly beside your land now has cabins dotting its banks, smoke curling from chimneys like muted flags of survival. You wave at neighbours more often. You know their children's names. Someone even built a small communal barn, not fancy, just planks and hope nailed together, but it means you can store tools, share feed, and hold larger gatherings when it's too wet or cold to cram 30 people into one kitchen. Still, it's not all baked bread and rosy cheeks. This land is testing you in new ways. Spring arrives like a tantrum, flooding your root cellar, snapping the heads off your new cabbage sprouts, and turning the paths into ankle-deep mudslides. One night, lightning takes out a maple tree that lands directly on your goat shed. You spend 3 days chasing livestock that no longer respect you. The rooster now sleeps on your porch like he owns it. You keep working though. Day in, day out. Amish life is built on repetition, on doing the same thing carefully, quietly, over and over, until you don't just survive, you become a part of the land itself. There's a rhythm forming in your days, an order to the madness. You rise before dawn, pray, milk the cows, chop wood, fix fences, plough fields. In the evenings, you sit by the fire with your family, your feet sore and your clothes stiff with sweat, but there's peace in the predictability. This you can handle. Then Sunday comes, and everything changes. See, Sunday is sacred. Not just spiritually, but socially. Every other Sunday, the community gathers in a rotating host home for Gottesdienst, a church service that's less about polished rituals and more about full immersion spiritual endurance. You tidy up your home days in advance if you're hosting. The benches, actually wide planks with no backs, get hauled in on a wagon and lined up wherever they'll fit. The preacher arrives early, dressed in plain black, his beard long, his face solemn enough to curdle milk. Service begins with singing, and not the bouncy 4-part harmony kind you might expect. No, these are slow, heavy German hymns, often sung in unison with an almost mournful cadence. Each verse stretches out like molasses, voices dragging in perfect droning harmony. The hymnals aren't even printed in modern script. If you've got a book at all, it's handwritten, fraying at the edges, passed down through generations. The sermon follows. And let's be clear, this isn't your average half-hour motivational talk. No, this is a full-body endurance event. 2 hours minimum, sometimes 3, all in dialect-heavy German. The preacher doesn't use notes, just conviction and volume. You shift on the hard bench, legs numb, back aching, trying to focus on the words through the fog of exhaustion and the gentle snoring of someone's grandfather 3 rows over. After the sermon comes prayer, long, winding, heartfelt. You pray for your crops, your neighbours, the ones still in Europe, the ones lost at sea, and the ones who haven't yet repented for wearing those slightly too bright suspenders. Then another hymn, then a final blessing, and after that, fellowship. The post-service meal is the closest thing you'll ever have to a party. Simple fare, bread, butter, pickled vegetables, smoked meats, maybe a pie if someone went rogue and got fancy. You sit on hay bales or the floor, or just hover awkwardly in corners, chatting softly, laughing even. The children run barefoot, the women compare stitch patterns, and the Biersitzgang. The men talk about soil and fences and the latest theological disagreement over shoe buckles. Here's your quirky fact for the night. Some early Amish groups debated whether men should wear hats with 3 creases or just one. Yes, really, because every detail of your appearance sends a message, and every message is either appropriately humble or dangerously proud. The Ordnung shows up here too, not in loud proclamations or written rules, but in sideways glances and soft corrections. A young man shows up in a shirt with buttons instead of hooks and eyes. There's a pause, a silence that's louder than words. No one scolds him. But at the next service, he's back in hooks, message received. It's subtle but powerful. The Ordnung isn't a list, it's a culture, a heartbeat, and if you step out of sync with it, you'll feel it long before anyone says a word. That's how the community stays together, even without central leadership. You're guided not by laws, but by shared understanding, passed down by lived example. Still, there are cracks. Not everyone agrees on everything. A few families argue that you should write the Ordnung down, make it official. Others say that would defeat the point. Some want stricter rules about land ownership. Others are quietly irritated that the new family from Zurich keeps using English words like okay and fence. There's even whispered debate about building a schoolhouse, radical, given that children traditionally learn at home or by doing chores until they can spell plow with a hoe. But the biggest discussion now? Whether to split. It's starting to feel like the group is growing faster than it can hold. More settlers mean more opinions, more interpretations of what it means to be plain. Some fear the unity that kept you alive will start to dilute. There's talk of forming smaller congregations, of separating not because of conflict, but to protect the integrity of your faith. And here's tonight's historical debate. When exactly did the first true Amish congregations form, distinct from the Mennonites in America? Some scholars argue it was immediate. Jakob Ammann's followers were already their own thing. Others say it was more gradual, with differences sharpening over decades as communities grew and confronted new challenges. Either way, the tension is real. The weight of preservation presses down harder with each passing year. You return home that Sunday evening with a full belly and a full mind. The moon is rising over the trees, casting pale light on your quiet homestead. You sit on your porch, watching fireflies blink over the fields, listening to the distant chirp of crickets and the soft creak of your house settling around you. This place is no longer a wilderness, not entirely. It's becoming something more. A sanctuary, a statement, a stubborn little outpost of faith in a world that still doesn't quite know what to do with you. And tomorrow, at dawn, it all begins again. You wake up the next morning to the sound of a cow complaining, loudly. It's barely light out. The sun's still hiding behind the trees, but your body knows the rhythm now. No clock needed. The rooster crows, the cow moos, and your spine does that thing where it audibly clicks into place as you swing your legs off the straw mattress. You stretch, pull on the same wool trousers you wore yesterday and the day before, and step outside into the cool dawn air. There's a soft mist blanketing the fields, curling low over the rows of rye and cabbage like it's trying to tuck them in. The smell is earthy, wood smoke, wet grass and manure. Lots of manure. Your breath puffs visibly in front of you as you trudge toward the barn, bucket in hand, boots squelching in the mud from last night's storm. The cow eyes you with that same deadpan stare she's had since you built this place. You mutter something about gratitude, you, and she flicks her tail at you like you're a disappointment. This is how most Amish mornings begin. Early, quiet and full of work before the sun even warms the roof. The animals are your first priority. You milk the cows, feed the chickens, check the pigs. Then you haul water from the pump because plumbing, of course, is too modern. You thank the Lord for the well anyway, because last summer when it dried up for 2 weeks you had to walk half a mile to your neighbour's spring just to get enough water to scrub your face. Your wife's already up, by the way. Has been for an hour. She's kneading bread, checking on the fire in the hearth, heating water for washing, and probably has a baby tied to her hip and another one clinging to her skirt. The children have chores too. There's no sleeping in on an Amish farm unless you're sick or dead. Even the little ones help collect eggs or stack firewood. Responsibility is dished out in spoonfuls as soon as you're old enough to walk in a straight line without falling over. Breakfast is ready around 6, not a croissant and cappuccino affair, but hearty and homemade. Porridge, maybe, or boiled potatoes, fried apples, thick slabs of bread slathered with lard or apple butter, and milk so fresh it's still warm. You eat quickly, not because you're rushed, but because there's still fencing to repair, fields to weed, and a strange fungal issue spreading through the turnips. The work never really stops. There's always something breaking, leaking, rotting or wandering off into the woods. You patch holes in the barn roof with scrap wood, fix the plough where it splintered it, and spend an entire afternoon relining the chicken coop after a fox got a little too bold last week. But here's the thing, you don't resent it. You might groan, mutter, even throw a wrench, softly, into a pile of straw, but this life, this relentless, repetitive, dirt under your nails life, it's yours, and it's purposeful. You're not punching a clock or selling something pointless to strangers. You're feeding your family, building your future, and living in obedience to the Ordnung. Ah yes, the Ordnung. It doesn't just tell you how to dress, it tells you how to build, how to live. That's why your house is made of simple logs, with no painted trim or decorative flourishes, why your barn has straight lines and muted colours, why your furniture is sturdy, functional, and has never even heard the word varnish. It also means no power tools, which if you've ever tried to build an entire barn with nothing but handsaws, hammers, and a very determined teenager, you'll understand is an act of both extreme patience and mild masochism. You measure twice, cut once, and pray that the beam you just spent 3 hours shaping isn't slightly too short. You won't throw it away, of course. That would be wasteful. You'll turn it into a bench leg or something, and no one will sit on it because it's slightly crooked. But that's not the point. The point is discipline. Every joint, every notch, every peg, it's all done with intention. Amish carpentry is famous for its precision, but also its humility. No flashy dovetailing, no secret compartments or hidden drawers. If you can build it plain, that's how it should be. Not because you lack skill, but because the skill is not the thing to show off. The outcome is. Now here's your historical nugget for the day. In the late 17th century, the Amish were known not just for their farming, but for their carpentry and craftsmanship. English settlers and other religious groups sometimes sought them out for tools, wagons, and furniture. Though the Amish never advertised or undercut, of course. They simply built what they needed, and others noticed the quality. Quiet excellence, you could say. Still, this creates some interesting moments. Like when an English neighbour offers to pay you to build him a porch swing. A swing? For sitting? You don't say no outright, you just explain calmly that swings aren't necessary. Then you spend 15 minutes helping him repair a fence instead. Everyone leaves satisfied. There are moments of joy in the work too. You carve a small toy for your daughter, a little horse on wheels painted only with the oil. She clutches it like treasure. You watch your son help a calf stand for the first time. You smell fresh cut hay and feel the sun warming your back. And when the barn's finally done and everyone stands back to admire it, simple, strong, square, you feel it in your chest. This is what building something eternal feels like. Now for the quirky side of things, there's this family up the road who insists on using a wooden contraption they call a people hauler. It's basically a wheelbarrow with a bench bolted to it meant for moving elders around the property. It squeaks like a wounded goose and tips over if you look at it wrong, but they swear it's efficient. You help reinforce it with extra braces one afternoon, mostly so Grandma doesn't end up face first in a ditch again. As evening falls, you clean up the tools, scrub your hands with lye soap and head inside. Dinner's on the table, stew, cabbage, fresh bread, and the lanterns cast soft golden light over everything. After the meal you sit together, reading a Bible passage in German, then just sitting. No distractions, no noise, just the sound of the wind outside, the creak of the cabin, and your family breathing around you. Sometimes you talk about tomorrow's tasks, sometimes you talk about God. Sometimes you say nothing at all because silence doesn't feel awkward here. It feels earned, like a warm bed after a cold day. And as you lie down, sore and spent, you remember, you're not just surviving anymore, you're building. Not just buildings, but legacy. And it all starts again in a few hours, when the cow calls, the rooster screams, and the sun creeps back over the trees. By now, you don't just wake up before sunrise, you expect it. Your body has learned the light and the dark like it once knew bells and clocks. There's no need for an alarm when the entire farm begins humming before dawn. When the cows start pacing, the rooster's on his 5th round of complaints, and someone's baby in the next room is making noises that signal something urgent and diaper-related. You pull on your shirt, thick linen still stiff from last night's chill, and step outside to start the day before it even fully begins. The stars are still fading, and there's that crisp, early morning stillness that only lasts about 10 minutes before the world catches up. You walk to the barn, lantern swinging gently in your hand, the cold biting at your fingers, your breath visible in soft clouds. It's quiet, but not silent. The land is alive with murmurs. An owl, somewhere in the trees, the creak of frozen timber, a far-off bark from your neighbour's dog. You're used to this now. It's the sound of everything working as it should. Your morning routine starts with milking, of course. You balance the bucket between your knees, settle in, and begin, your hands moving in practiced rhythm. The cow sighs as if to say, "Here we go again," and the warm milk hits the pail with soft, steady splashes. You'll do this for several cows because your family needs it, your neighbours trade for it. And let's face it, milk is practically a currency out here. When you're done, you'll carry the sloshing buckets back into the house and set them in the cool room to rest while the cream rises. Butter making will come later. Everything has its time. Meanwhile, inside, breakfast is underway. Your wife's been up since before you again, and already has dough rising in the mixing bowl, a kettle heating over the fire, and a few apples stewing in a pan with cloves and cinnamon. She does this every morning like it's nothing, hands moving with the kind of grace only muscle memory can provide. The kids, one by one, begin to stir. Some pretend to sleep longer, hoping to skip morning chores. It never works. The eldest helps chop kindling. The younger ones sweep the floor, collect eggs, fill water basins. No one's idle, not because of punishment, but because idleness feels wrong here, like forgetting to breathe. There's a sense that every hand, no matter how small, has a place in the machine. You're not raising children exactly. You're raising future adults who will work alongside you, who will carry this rhythm forward long after your back gives out and your beard turns completely white. Breakfast isn't rushed, but it's not leisurely either. There's a short prayer, soft and spoken in unison. A pause, a breath, and then everyone digs in. You eat thick slices of fresh bread slathered with lard or homemade jam, boiled eggs, milk still warm from the barn. There's coffee, but not the kind you're picturing. It's weak, thin, made from roasted barley or chicory, often more symbolic than caffeinated. The real fuel is the food and the faith that comes with it. Once the meal is cleared, the day's work begins in earnest. Today's a ploughing day, and that means you hitch up the draft horse. Old, dependable, with a fondness for pausing exactly when you least want him to. The plough itself is a beast, solid wood with an iron tip, sure guided entirely by your grip and your ability to not fall over when it catches a root. You trudge behind it for hours, your boots sinking into the damp soil, the sun climbing slowly overhead, sweat gathering on your back even though the wind stays cool. And here's your historical tidbit. Amish ploughing techniques in the late 1600s were based on old European methods, adapted to the dense, unfamiliar soil of the Pennsylvania frontier. They favoured single-blade ploughs, worked in straight rows, and often rotated crops, rye, oats, barley, not just to keep the land fertile, but because diversity in the field meant survival in the pantry. There's no room for monoculture here. One failed crop could mean a year of hunger. Meanwhile, back at the house, laundry day is in full swing, which means tubs of boiling water hauled from the fire, a washboard, lye soap strong enough to strip paint, and a level of arm strength that borders on athletic. The clothes are scrubbed, wrung, and hung on long lines strung between trees. It's hard work, but there's a kind of beauty in the rows of shirts and bonnets swaying in the breeze, like flags of survival. And just when things start to feel stable, the baby gets sick. It starts with a cough, then a fever, then a night of restlessness and cries that sound different, sharper, weaker. You've seen this before. Children get sick, sometimes recover, sometimes not. There are no doctors nearby, no clinics. Your medical kit is a bundle of dried herbs, a few jars of salve, and a worn prayer book. Your wife wraps the baby in warm blankets, feeds him hot broth from a stuna, whispers psalms through tears she won't let the other children see. This is when your faith kicks in. Not the kind you sing about, but the kind that steadies your hands when everything feels like it's slipping. You pace the floor, you stoke the fire, you pray not loudly but constantly. You recall that time in Europe when an elder claimed onion poultices could break a fever. You try it. You wait. The hours stretch. The room feels like a tunnel. By morning, the fever breaks. You don't cry, but you come close. Your wife kisses the baby's forehead and then collapses in the corner, eyes closed, holding the child to her chest like a shield. The other children quietly watching from the doorway let out breaths they didn't know they were holding. You sit down, the weight of the night pressing into your bones, and for a moment, the world goes quiet again. Later, as you return to your chores, because they don't wait, not even for sick babies or sleepless nights, you think about the fragility of this life, how quickly everything you've built could vanish. Fire, illness, crop failure, a harsh winter, none of it's far away, and yet there's this strange peace in knowing that nothing is wasted. Even the suffering has purpose. You're not promised comfort, just meaning, and you'll take that. Quirky fact of the day, some Amish families in this period believed that placing a Bible under a sick child's mattress would help draw out illness. Others used bits of iron or charcoal as protective tokens, not superstition exactly, but a blend of folk practice and theology that slipped through the cracks of persecution and memory. No one brags about it, but everyone knows someone whose grandmother swears by it. As dusk falls, you walk the edge of your field, looking out at the neat rows of new growth pushing up through the dirt. You hear laughter from inside the house, your children playing a quiet game with stones on the hearth. The lanterns glow through the windows like little stars. And tomorrow, before sunrise, it begins again. The ploughing, the milking, the worry, the wonder, the whispered prayers in the dark. Because this is life now, and you are alive. The wind shifts sometime during the night, and by morning summer has officially arrived. Not the nice kind of summer. With lemonade and hammocks, but the heavy, sticky, why is my shirt already soaked at 6 a.m. kind. You step outside and it's like walking into someone's mouth. Warm, humid, and vaguely unpleasant. The air hangs low, thick with the scent of sweat, livestock, and whatever the cows decided to step in overnight. You don't complain out loud, that's not the Amish way, but internally, you file this under challenges the Lord has given me today. And you're not alone. Everyone in the community is dealing with the heat in their own hornut stoic ways. Men with shirts clinging to their backs, women tucking damp strands of hair into their bonnets for the third time before breakfast, kids with flushed cheeks wiping their noses on their sleeves and running barefoot through the grass, because shoes are a form of torture right now. You get it. You're tempted to go barefoot too, but then you remember last week's rogue nail incident and decide against it. Today's work? Haymaking, because what better time to haul giant bundles of dry, itchy grass than during the hottest week of the year. You grab your pitchfork and head to the field, already dreading the next 10 hours of sunburn and sneezing. You're not alone. Half the community's there, walking slowly in wide-brimmed hats, sweat glistening on forearms, sleeves rolled precisely to the elbow. No more, no less, because modesty still applies even when you're on fire. You work methodically, cut, rake, bundle and stack. The scythes swing in long arcs, whizzing through the grass with that clean rhythmic shk sound that becomes hypnotic after a while. The piles grow, the sun climbs higher. Your hat starts to feel like it's cooking your skull. You pause to drink from a tin cup of lukewarm well water, and it tastes like salvation. Then it's back to work. And here's where things get interesting. The Amish don't sweat loudly. No one's groaning or grumbling or huffing dramatically. The work is hard, yes, but there's pride in doing it without fuss. You move like a machine, slow, steady, focused. A living reminder that toil is honourable, not something to be escaped. Still, you do allow yourself small comforts. A cloth soaked in cool water and draped around your neck. A brief pause in the shade, chewing on a piece of dried apple someone passed around. A glance up at the sky to see clouds forming. Maybe rain, maybe relief. And if someone cracks a quiet joke about hay getting stuck in unmentionable places, well, that's just good community bonding. Speaking of clothes, let's talk about what you're wearing, because it's a lot. The Ordnung, as always, dictates your outfit down to the tiniest detail. For you, long sleeves, plain buttons, if any, dark trousers held up with suspenders, and a wide-brimmed straw hat that you'll eventually hate but never remove. For the women, long heavy dresses made of plain fabrics in dark colours, usually navy, brown or black, with capes and aprons layered on top. And bonnets, of course. Always the bonnets. They serve a purpose: modesty, protection, spiritual discipline. But in July, they may as well be portable ovens. It's one of the quirks of Amish life that never quite gets comfortable. Dressing modestly doesn't bend to the weather. There's no summer wardrobe or casual Friday. The rules don't change just because the temperature does. You suffer through it, because it's not about personal comfort. It's about community standards, humility, and resisting vanity. If your clothes are hot, stiff, and drab, that's kind of the point. And here's the fringe fact of the day. There were debates, even back then, about whether women could use pins or hooks to fasten their dresses. Pins were seen by some as too worldly, too decorative, while others argued they were just practical. It sounds silly, like arguing over whether a rock is too shiny, But in a world where appearance is theology, even small choices ripple out. You finish the day's haywork just as the first thunder rumbles in the distance. Good timing for once. Everyone moves quickly, gathering tools, covering stacks with tarps, walking briskly back toward their homes without needing to be told. That's another thing about this life. You get used to moving together, like parts of a body. No shouting, no herding, just flow. You return home soaked with sweat, covered in dust and straw, and looking like you just lost a fight with a wheat thresher. Your wife meets you at the door with a knowing look and a wet cloth. You don't need to speak. You wash your face and hands, then sit down to dinner. The meal is simple. Boiled potatoes, green beans from the garden, maybe some fried onions and a slice of dried sausage. Someone traded you last week. There's bread, always bread, and butter churned fresh that morning. You eat with quiet gratitude, pausing to listen to the rain start tapping gently on the roof. The air cools, just enough to make you forget the heat of the field, for now. After dinner, you help repair a broken hinge on the barn door again, then sit for a while with your family on the porch. No talking, really, just watching the storm. The sky flashes, the thunder rolls, and everyone seems to lean just a little closer together, like the world outside could be held off if you all sit close enough. Later, once the little ones are asleep and the fire has burned low, you lay out your clothes to dry and pull on a nightshirt that's seen better days. Your bones ache, your feet throb, there's hay stuck in your hair, but the day is done and nothing caught fire, and that's enough. And here's your scholarly debate for the night. How strictly did the Ordnung apply in these early years? Some historians argue that the rules were already firm by the late 1800s, carried over directly from Jakob Ammann's original teachings. Others believe the Ordnung was more fluid at first, adapting to the frontier conditions, becoming rigid only as communities grew and formalised. The truth? Probably somewhere in between. But one thing's certain, the clothes, the discipline, the simplicity, they weren't just personal choices, they were survival strategies, identity markers, and quiet acts of resistance. As you drift off to sleep, the storm still murmuring outside, you think about how even the smallest parts of your life, what you wear, what you eat, how you stack your hay, are tied into something bigger. A system, a belief, a people, and even when it itches or burns or clings in the heat, you wear it all like armour. Because out here, your faith isn't just something you believe, it's something you wear, carry, lift, and live. Every single day. Sunday again. You knew it was coming, but that doesn't stop it from creeping up like a stiff breeze, gentle at first, then suddenly inside your coat tugging everything into a stillness. The morning arrives with the same early light as always, but the rhythm is different, slower, calmer. You don't rush. You move through the barn chores with quiet efficiency, the animals sensing something too, their usual impatience softened, as if they understand that today isn't about them. It's church day, which means you're either walking to someone else's home or hosting in your own. This week, the Yoda family is opening their doors. You finish your chores early, scrub your hands and face at the basin, and get dressed in your Sunday best, which, to be clear, is only slightly different from your Monday to Saturday best. Everything's still plain, still dark, still handmade. The difference is in the details. A cleaner collar, freshly ironed apron, perhaps a slightly less wrinkled hat. You don't dress to impress, you dress to disappear. Your children line up one by one, their hair neatly combed, their hands washed, their eyes full of half-asleep curiosity. They know the drill. Church days are long, not dramatic, not joyful in the way outsiders think of worship. They're solemn, serious, filled with more silence than speech. It's not about feeling good, it's about getting right. You walk as a family, the Yoda place a good 40 minutes away by foot. The sun's already warming the tops of the trees, and the path winds through open fields and groves where the grass is still heavy with dew. You pass other families along the way, each dressed in the same style, faces set with the same quiet anticipation. There's no chatting, no greeting beyond the occasional nod. It's not coldness, it's reverence. The day has begun. At the Yodas, the benches have already been delivered. Long, backless planks, movable pews that serve a second life during the week, as makeshift tables and barn seating. They're set up in the main room, every chair carefully aligned. The stove has been lit to take the edge off the morning chill. Pans of bread, jars of pickles, and rows of empty mugs are lined up for the meal to come. You take your place, men on one side, women on the other. Children settle in front, and already learning the art of sitting still for hours at a time. The room is packed, but not crowded. 100 bodies in a space made for 20, yet somehow it works. The preacher arrives, removes his hat, and begins with a prayer so soft you have to lean forward just to catch the rhythm. Then the singing starts. These hymns aren't just songs, they're slow-moving vessels of memory, sung in High German, words passed down from centuries ago. You hold the same phrases your ancestors once whispered, in caves, barns, prisons. There's no harmony, no instrumentation, no rushing. Every syllable drags across your tongue like molasses, soaked in sorrow and conviction. The room fills with the sound, not beautiful in a musical sense, but deeply human, raw, honest, heavy. Then comes the sermon. And if you were hoping for a quick burst of spiritual encouragement, you're in the wrong place. This is endurance theology. 2 hours, maybe more, spoken in dialect. No theatrics, no jokes, just straight scripture. Dissected slowly, methodically, like carving a message into stone with your bare hands. You sit upright, your spine complaining. You shift your weight from foot to foot. At some point you stop feeling your backside. That's normal. The preacher speaks on humility, on obedience, on the danger of pride and the slow creep of worldliness. He tells a story quietly about a young man who refused to confess a prideful act and was shunned, eventually dying alone in the woods, unrepentant. There's no drama in his voice, just fact. You glance at your children and wonder how much they absorb, probably more than you think. After the sermon, more prayer, more hymns. The windows fog slightly from the body heat. Outside, the sun climbs higher. The world carries on, but in here, time moves differently. Then finally, the service ends, not with applause or handshakes, but with a slow unravelling. People stand, stretch subtly, whisper brief greetings. The benches are shifted. The meal begins. The post-service meal is as consistent as the sermon. Bread, butter, pickled eggs, dried sausage, strong coffee, slices of apple. Simple, satisfying, served without ceremony. You eat in the same quiet way you worship, grateful but not loud about it. There's a comfort in this repetition, a shared understanding that nothing needs to change as long as it continues to work. You chat softly with the other men, about fence repair, about someone's new calf, about how the storms last week flattened your rye field just enough to be annoying but not devastating. The women exchange recipes without writing anything down, the children chase each other, their laughter subdued but real. Even Joy here knows how to be modest. And here's your fringe fact. In early Amish communities, sermons weren't written down or standardized. Each was composed fresh, inspired by scripture and the preacher's own meditations. That meant your spiritual nourishment could vary dramatically, depending on who stood up that day. 1 week, a thunderclap of fire and brimstone. The next, a whisper of grace and quiet warnings. It kept you humble, and slightly unsure of whether this week would bring comfort or spiritual crisis. As the meal winds down, someone reads a short passage from the Ausbund, the Amish hymnal, and possibly the oldest Protestant songbook still in use today. It was originally written by Anabaptist prisoners in the 1500s, scribbled down while chained in dungeons. And now it's here, echoing through a quiet farmhouse in Pennsylvania, centuries later, being sung by people in hand-stitched clothes with calloused hands and open hearts. That's the thread running through everything. Continuity, not convenience, not entertainment. You don't come to church to feel good, you come to be reminded of who you are, where you came from, and how easily the world can pull you away from that. By mid-afternoon, the benches are loaded back onto the wagon. Dishes are scrubbed, children gathered, goodbyes whispered. You walk home the same way you came, through the fields under the sky, with your family close and your soul just a little heavier, but grounded, still rooted. And here's the debate of the day. Modern scholars still discuss whether these early Amish services were too rigid, whether the lack of spontaneity and emotional expression limited spiritual growth. Some argue that this restraint was survival, that in a world that tried to silence you, quietness became your power. Others think it was a slow calcification, a well-meaning rigidity that grew out of trauma and hardened over time. Either way, the silence remained. And you're part of that legacy now. You return home just as the sky begins to darken again. The animals need one last check. The lanterns need to be lit. The children yawn and lean into you as you gather for evening prayer. It's been a long day, quiet, yes, but not easy. And tomorrow at dawn the rhythm picks back up. But for tonight, You sleep with the echoes of hymns still trailing through your thoughts, soft as candlelight. If you're a child in an Amish household in the 1690s, you don't get the luxury of a childhood the way folks will one day talk about it. No idle afternoons building tree houses or running around with wooden swords pretending to be knights. No toy chests, no nap times, no school desks carved with hearts and initials. What you get is a task list that starts around age 4 and doesn't stop until your bones do, and honestly, you're weirdly proud of it. You wake up to your mother's voice, not yelling, never yelling, but firm, clear, and entirely immune to your sleepy protests. You wriggle out of your straw-stuffed mattress, slip on your shirt, always the same one, linen undyed and scratchy, and shuffle to the basin to splash cold water on your face until you're awake enough to hold a broom without tripping over it. By sunrise, you're already outside, feeding chickens, hauling small buckets of water, or pulling weeds in the garden with your siblings. You're still learning to tie knots, cut twine, and pour without spilling, but no one waits for perfection. You learn by doing, and doing, and doing some more. Play happens, sure, but it's the kind of play that folds right into work. Chasing the piglet who escaped again? Technically fun, but also necessary. Turning your little brother's sock into a corncob puppet while you wait for the bread to rise? Entertainment, but within parameters. You don't run wild, you stay close. You observe the adults, you mimic their movements. The line between child and apprentice is a thin one. Boys learn to handle tools early. Your father shows you how to sharpen a blade, split kindling, and drive a nail straight. Though the first time you try, you hit your thumb so hard you see stars and maybe meet an ancestor. He pats your shoulder, hands you another nail, and moves on. Girls are expected to learn cooking, sewing, laundry, and the art of wrangling younger siblings with one hand while peeling potatoes with the other. Your sister can knead bread like she was born with flour on her palms. She knows how to stitch a hem that won't unravel after one wash, how to calm a crying toddler with a song so old no one remembers where it came from. And the clothes, you're already dressed like a miniature adult. No bright colours, no ribbons, no frills, just plain dresses, simple shirts, suspenders, aprons. You look like someone's tiny grandfather, and honestly, you're into it. There's comfort in knowing exactly what you're supposed to wear, what it means and why it matters. Your parents have explained this many times. Vanity is a temptation, and the more you stand out, the easier it is to fall. Of course, not everything's grim and grey. There's joy, but it's not loud. It's the kind of joy that seeps in slowly, like when your mother lets you lick the molasses spoon, or when your father lets you hold the lantern on the walk home from a neighbour's, and you pretend you're guiding the whole world. It's when you catch a toad in the field and keep it in a box for a day before deciding he probably misses his family, and letting him go. There's laughter too, but it's softer, less explosive, more like air escaping from a jar, gentle and over fast. And here's a curious little fringe fact. Some early Amish children were taught not to make dolls with faces. Blank cloth dolls sewn without eyes or mouths were considered the standard. Why? Because giving a doll a face was too close to vanity, too close to pride. It wasn't about fear of idolatry, though maybe a touch of that too, but about keeping even play grounded in humility. So your toys might be a cornhusk bundle, a stick shaped like a goose, or a rag doll that stares eternally into the void. Comforting. Education exists, but not in the formal sense. Not yet. You learn numbers enough to measure, letters enough to read the Bible. You're expected to understand High German hymns, Swiss dialect for home life, and enough English to not get swindled at market. That's right. 3 languages, all baked into your little developing brain while you're still figuring out how not to trip over your own feet. And school? Well, let's just say it's not Hogwarts. It's one room, if it exists at all, and only for a few months a year, just enough to get through the basics. After that, it's assumed that real education happens in the fields, the kitchen, the barn, and the quiet hours before supper. When your father opens the family Bible and reads aloud while the wood stove crackles, you listen, not because you're forced to, but because there's something in the way he reads. Slow, careful, like every word holds weight. What about rebellion? Well, it's quieter too. You might sneak a smile during prayers, or stash a shiny rock in your pocket because it sparkles like the kind of things you're not supposed to admire. Maybe you ask a question that's a little too bold. Why can't we wear red? Or, why doesn't God like music with drums? The answer is always the same, said gently but firmly, because we're called to be set apart. Set apart, the phrase you hear again and again, You're not meant to be like the English children with their bright clothes and their lazy Sunday games. You're not here for games. You're here to grow into someone who can hold the line, who can resist the world's pull. That sounds like a lot for a 7-year-old, but you take it seriously, because you're treated like you matter, like your choices, even ripple out into eternity. And here's your scholarly debate. How strict was Amish child rearing in these earliest days in America? Some say it was rigid, almost harsh, focused more on obedience than affection. Others argue that within the discipline was a deep tenderness, that Amish children felt secure because they knew exactly where they stood, held in place by a web of family, faith, and routine. The truth, as always, likely floats somewhere in the middle. Structure without softness becomes cruelty, but chaos without conviction loses itself. The Amish had no room for either extreme. As dusk settles over the fields, you see your child self sitting on the porch, barefoot, worn from the day but not unhappy. Maybe you're whittling a stick. Maybe you're humming a hymn. Maybe you're just watching the fireflies blink in and out across the grass, each light a flicker of something sacred. And inside, your mother folds laundry while your father reads scripture. The younger ones are already snoring under patchwork quilts. Tomorrow, the sun will rise early and you'll be out feeding chickens again before you even fully wake up. But for now, in this brief moment between dusk and dreams, you're allowed to simply be. A child, in a world that's hard but safe, quiet, but not silent, and always, always watching. It's early as usual. The sun hasn't fully broken the horizon yet, but already the chickens are restless, the cows are impatient, and your bladder, well, that's the issue. Nature's calling, and the answer isn't down the hall. It's about 20 paces across the yard, behind the barn, tucked between the firewood pile and the back fence. That's right, we're finally talking about the outhouse. Buckle up. You step outside, squinting into the cool morning air, boots half-laced, arms folded against the chill. There's dew on the grass, and something in your bones is telling you this will be the last of the mild mornings before the cold starts creeping back in. But your priority isn't weather. It's getting to the outhouse before someone else does, because your entire family, 6, maybe 10 people depending on who's visiting, is sharing a 1-seater wooden box with a hole in it. There's no candle in there, no window, just a draft, a splintered bench, and a smell that politely announces itself 5 feet before you reach the door. You knock. It's empty. Small miracle. You step in, do what you have to do, and focus very hard on not touching anything unnecessarily. The door doesn't quite latch, so you hold it shut with one hand while you hover. Nothing about this is dignified, and no one pretends otherwise. Welcome to hygiene in 17th century Amish life. It's rough. Cleanliness is fact, of course. Spiritually, physically, it all ties into your sense of discipline and care. But your options, limited. Your bathtub is a large tin basin stored in the pantry or barn when not in use, and filled by hand with buckets of warmed water from the hearth. If you're lucky, you get to bathe once a week, maybe, in the same water as your siblings, in order of age, and no, you don't get fresh water every time. This is not a spa. Soap is homemade, sharp-smelling stuff that scrapes off the grime and maybe a little skin. It's a mix of animal fat and lye, boiled in a kettle that now has a permanent crust of past soap batches clinging to its edges. Washing your hands before meals is expected. Washing behind your ears is assumed. But don't get wild ideas about daily showers. That concept is still centuries away. You keep your nails short, not for fashion, but because long nails just turn into tiny shovels for dirt. Your hair is trimmed conservatively, always under a cap or hat. Beards are serious business. Worn by married men, grown long and neat. Never with a moustache, because moustaches are associated with military officers. Exactly the kind of people you're not trying to resemble. Now, let's talk laundry. Not your soft-tumbled, lavender-scented kind. This is a full-body workout that takes an entire day, sometimes 2. First, you heat the water over the fire. Then you scrub the clothes on a washboard with lye soap till your knuckles hate you. Then you rinse, wring out, repeat. Then you drag everything outside and hang it on lines to dry, praying it doesn't rain, blow away, or get decorated by the local birds. White clothes, good luck. If you've got anything close to white, it'll be beige by week 3. Children's clothes are stained with grass, ash, and whatever that was from last week's mysterious stew accident. And let's not even talk about undergarments. You own maybe 2 sets. Maybe. You rotate them like sacred relics. Here's your fringe fact. Some Amish used ashes mixed with animal urine as a natural bleach. Yes, you heard that right, urine. Collected, stored and used because ammonia gets the whites, well, closer to white. It's effective. It's also horrifying, but out here, you use what works. Toothbrushing? Not really a thing. You might rub your teeth with a cloth, chew on a licorice root or rinse with salt water. Some use twigs with frayed ends to scrub. Cavities happen, sure, but dentists aren't exactly popping up on every corner. If a tooth goes bad, you wait until it's unbearable, then hope someone knows how to yank it with minimal screaming and bleeding. Men shave before baptism, but once married, you grow a beard. It's not optional, it's a spiritual badge, a public sign that you're now responsible not just for yourself, but for your family, your community, and your place in the Ordnung. You don't trim it to look neat, you trim it to not get caught in the butter churn. Women wear their hair long, always pinned up and covered by a prayer cap. You never leave the house without one. The cap isn't decorative, it's theological. It's obedience in fabric form, a symbol of submission to God, to order, to a way of life that doesn't leave room for personal flair. Now that doesn't mean vanity disappears entirely. You still notice things. A bonnet tied just a bit too stylishly. A boy whose hat brim is sharper than it needs to be. A girl whose apron is made from slightly finer fabric. These things are noticed, gossiped about quietly, corrected eventually. The Ordnung doesn't scream, it whispers, and its whispers carry weight. Let's take a moment to talk about your bath day. It's a big deal, you plan for it, you heat water for hours, pour it into the basin, test it with a cautious toe, and then lower yourself in. The water turns brown within minutes. You scrub quickly, efficiently. Hair gets washed with soap and rainwater, then combed with a wooden or bone comb that pulls out more than it untangles. If you're under 10, you get bathed in the kitchen while everyone just sort of pretends not to notice. If you're older, maybe you get privacy. Maybe. And here's where the scholarly debate comes in, Mol. Historians argue over how much the early Amish actually prioritised physical cleanliness. Some records suggest they were among the cleaner groups, taking pride in their appearance even without ornament. Others say their hygiene was about average for rural folk of the time, meaning functional but far from fragrant. Either way, it's clear they cared about order, even in the dirt. Despite all the limitations, there's a quiet dignity in the routines. Washing your hands before meals, scrubbing the floor on Fridays, sweeping the steps each morning. It's not just tidiness, it's discipline. The body and the soul both kept in line. Cleanliness is a form of spiritual awareness. And sometimes, even within all this restraint, there's a moment of indulgence. Someone trades for a bar of soap from the English, a sweet-scented thing that smells like lavender or mint. You use it sparingly once a month, maybe just on your neck. It feels like sin, but the good kind. You smile about it for days. That night, after a long day of chores and a fresh pair of underclothes, one of your two, you sit by the fire, your hair damp from say a bath, and your body humming with the clean ache of hard work. You're not fragrant, not glowing, not sparkly, but you're honest, present, grounded in a world that's real. And you sleep deeply, knowing that tomorrow you'll sweat it all off again. It's a cool evening in late summer, the kind that hangs golden in the air for a little longer than expected, like the sun forgot to leave. The cicadas have started their usual chorus, crickets chiming in for backup, and somewhere in the distance someone's dog won't stop barking at a fence post. You're sitting on the edge of your porch with your eldest daughter pretending to mend a ripped apron, but you're not paying attention to the stitches. You're listening, because tonight, something's going on. There's a flicker of lantern light on the road, just past the wheat field. A buggy creaks in slowly, careful not to spook the horse, and two figures climb out, your neighbour's son and your niece. She's visiting from another settlement, and by visiting, we mean there's a perfectly arranged opportunity for these two to do something scandalous. Sit in a room and talk. This is how courtship works. No dates, no dances, no candlelit picnics by the river while someone plays the lute. Here, it's all about intentionality. The boy shows interest by asking permission to visit. The girl agrees. Her parents agree. Everyone agrees, except maybe the little brother who's still mad the visitor once teased him about his slow handwriting. But no one asks the little brother. The tradition is called bundling, yes, the actual name, and it's as awkward as it sounds. The young man visits the girl in her family's home, usually after supper. They talk, maybe read scripture, maybe hold hands under a shared blanket. That's about as spicy as it gets. And yes, before you ask, there is usually a chaperone. Sometimes it's a younger sibling pretending to be asleep in the corner. Sometimes it's a very awake parent in the next room, knitting with enough passive-aggressive intensity to split the yarn. Bundling is part romance, part interview, part community theatre. Everyone knows it's happening, everyone pretends not to hover, and everyone has opinions. The Ordnung doesn't outline every detail of courtship, but the unspoken rules are ironclad. No sneaking off, no excessive touching, and definitely no English-style shenanigans like letter writing or, heaven forbid, kissing before commitment. But here's your quirky historical twist. In some Amish and Mennonite communities, bundling involved something even more theatrical. The young couple would actually lie side by side in bed, with a board placed between them. Yes, a literal courting board, a medieval version of look but don't touch. It was meant to promote intimacy without, well, intimacy. And while scholars debate how common this was among 17th century Amish, the practice certainly existed in Anabaptist and rural European circles. Whether your community goes for that method or not depends on how traditional your bishop is, and how nervous your parents are. Tonight the couple stays in the main room. They sit facing each other, a candle flickering between them, a shared blanket tucked over their laps. The conversation drifts between farming yields and shared scripture. You catch snippets. Something about Psalm 37, something about whether he plans to build his own house or just stay on his father's land. You listen without looking like you're listening. The two parents, your sister and her husband, pretend to be absorbed in their embroidery and harness repairs, but you can see their ears tilting slightly. This is a delicate moment. Not just romantic, but strategic. Marriage is a spiritual commitment, yes, but also a survival pact. You need someone who can milk a cow, discipline a child, recite scripture, and also not leave the water bucket out to freeze every single night. And love? That's complicated. You hope it grows, you pray it will. But no one here marries for infatuation. You marry for faith, function, and if God wills it, affection that deepens with time. It's less fireworks, more ember, warm, quiet, steady. And if the couple blushes at the right times and doesn't argue about the Lord's Prayer, it's usually a good sign. You remember your own courting days, the nervousness, the clumsy attempts at compliments, the way your hand shook the first time you passed her a jar of pickled beets and called her good with brine. Romantic, in its own vegetable-forward way. That's how you were taught. Courtship is sacred, and marriage is forever. There's no dating around, no changing your mind 6 months in. Once you're wed, you're joined in the eyes of the community and God. Divorce isn't just frowned upon, it's non-existent. Unheard of. The only way out is death, and even then, you're expected to mourn modestly, remarry quietly, and not act like a character from a romance pamphlet. The courtship lasts weeks, maybe months. If all goes well, the boy will ask the bishop for permission to propose. He'll speak to her father first, never the girl directly, and then, if approved, she'll receive the proposal not as a question, but more of a sacred invitation. There's no down-on-one-knee moment, no ring, just a shared understanding, sealed with a prayer, and eventually a ceremony. Here's your historical nugget. Amish weddings didn't and still don't happen in churches. They take place in homes or barns. Surrounded by the community. The bride wears a new dress, often tinted blue, that she will continue wearing to services afterward. It's not a gown, but a garment meant for a lifetime. There are no photos, no dancing, no cake cutting, just solemn vows, a meal, and a shared life beginning without spectacle. Back to tonight. Your niece walks her suitor to the door after a few hours of conversation, and they part with a polite nod. No kiss, no lingering stares, just the quiet satisfaction of two people moving cautiously forward. You nod to the boy as he leaves, and he nods back with just enough confidence to hint he'll be returning next week. Inside, your sister exhales the breath she didn't know she was holding, and says nothing as she begins putting away the mugs. Her husband clears his throat in that way that fathers do when they're trying not to show emotion. Your niece smiles, just barely, and disappears upstairs. You sit for a moment staring into the flame of the candle, wondering what kind of man that boy will become, wondering what kind of mother your niece will be, wondering if they'll make it, if they'll hold each other through storms and still laugh when the milk spills and the children scream and the firewood is wet again. But that's not for tonight. Tonight is just the first page of something ancient. Not a story of romance and poetry and moonlit rides, but of shared buckets, shared burdens, and a quiet trust that builds, board by board, word by word. As the lantern dims and the house settles into sleep, you whisper a prayer, not just for them, but for all the young ones stepping into something they don't fully understand, held up by faith, by family, and by the soft but solid walls of tradition. You don't wake up on your wedding day to birdsong and a pastel sunrise. There's no perfumed pillow, no giddy bridesmaids fluttering around you with corsages and coffee. What you wake to is the usual ruckus, rooster screaming, cow stomping, someone in the kitchen banging a spoon against a pot with what sounds like unnecessary enthusiasm. It's your wedding day, sure, but the farm doesn't care. Chores still need doing. Cows don't milk themselves just because you're getting hitched. So you rise early, like always, and go through your routine one last time as an unmarried person. It's strangely comforting. You haul water, you feed the chickens, you scrub your hands raw and put on your cleanest, plainest clothes. A new blue dress for her, a black suit for him, no lace, no buttons, no white veils or flower crowns or embroidered initials. That's not how it's done. That's never how it's been done. The wedding isn't at a church because there isn't one. It's at someone's house, likely the bride's if there's room, which means that while you're outside checking the fence for gaps, your family is frantically turning the living room into a worship hall and your kitchen into a field kitchen. The benches arrive early, stacked on a wagon like solemn guests. The women set out rows of plates, pickle jars, slabs of meat, and endless loaves of bread. You'd think the meal was the main event, judging by the attention it's getting, and in some ways maybe it is. Neighbours begin to arrive just after breakfast. No formal invitations were sent, just word of mouth, passed between milk pails and fence lines over the last few weeks. Some folks walk miles to be here. Buggies rolling in quietly under the grey sky. Everyone's dressed the same. If you didn't know the bride and groom personally, you'd have no clue who they were. And that's exactly the point. There's no grand procession, no music, no father of the bride moment. Instead, once the benches are filled and the preacher clears his throat, the ceremony begins, simple, serious, and long. He preaches about marriage as a covenant, not a contract, about duty, not desire, about how love, while welcome, is not the foundation, obedience is. You sit still for nearly 3 hours, hands folded, legs stiff, listening to the quiet murmurs of scripture echo off the wooden walls. Then come the vows, not flowery, not poetic, just promises. To love, to serve, to remain faithful, to live plainly, raise children humbly, and keep the Ordnung. There's no I do, no dramatic kiss, just the nods of two people agreeing to walk forward together, forever, into a life that is predictably difficult and beautifully sacred. And here's your historical tidbit. Amish weddings in the 17th century were often held in late autumn, after the harvest and before the first snow. It was the practical time, when people weren't too busy in the fields and the travel was still possible. And while the ceremony was always grounded in solemnity, the meal afterward, that's where the community let a bit of joy peek through. So after the final hymn and prayer, the benches are cleared, the table's set and the feast begins, not fancy but abundant. Roasted meats, pickled everything, sauerkraut, stewed apples and pies, so many pies. And coffee, strong enough to wake the dead, poured into thick mugs that you'll wash by hand later, when the house is quiet again. The couple eats in silence, side by side, surrounded by chatter and clinking plates. There's no kissing, no toasts, but everyone knows what's happening here. It's celebration by implication. And here's the quirky bit. The couple doesn't leave for a honeymoon. They don't even leave the house. In fact, tradition says they stay put and host. For a full 3 days, extended family and neighbours drop by, continuing the celebration in waves. More meals, more talk, more subtle observation of the newlyweds' body language just to determine if they're adjusting well. Because that's the thing about an Amish marriage. It's not just between two people. It's a union sanctioned by the community, upheld by the Ordnung, and sustained by shared accountability. Your first night as husband and wife is not what a modern world might expect. There's no rose petals, no silk sheets, no champagne. There's a straw mattress, a thick quilt, and a quiet awareness that this is where your real work begins. You undress separately, change into night clothes that are just as plain as your day clothes, and slide into bed next to someone who is suddenly no longer the boy who visited, or the girl from the other farm, but your partner, your person, your tether to this life. You lie in silence, hearts racing under the weight of newness. Maybe you whisper, maybe you don't. But there's a strange sense of peace, like two tools finally placed in the same toolbox after years of waiting. In the days that follow, the routines begin to intertwine. She wakes earlier to light the stove. You adjust the yoke on the plough. You discuss whether to build a second shed, whether to raise pigs this year. You fold laundry side by side, sitting on the steps. You plant garlic together because someone said it keeps away spirits, and honestly, you just like the way it smells in the soil. Marriage is not a fairy tale. It's an apprenticeship in love. You learn the art of making space for each other, even when you're both tired, even when the barn door breaks again, even when the baby cries for hours and you accidentally step on the cat and say something you immediately regret. You apologise, you forgive, you try again. Always, you try again. And here's the scholarly debate. Did early Amish marriages succeed because of love or despite it? Some argue that the strict framework allowed couples to thrive without the pressure of romance. Others believe it suppressed emotional depth. But those who lived it might say love came later. But when it did, it was the kind that stuck. Not because of butterflies, but because of bonds. Years from now, you'll still be walking side by side to Sunday service, children in tow, hands brushing against each other in that barely their way. You'll still be eating boiled potatoes and talking about the fence. And every now and then you'll glance at her across the table or the field and feel that deep, wordless certainty. This is forever. Not in theory, but in action. In morning milking and evening prayer and the soft, unbreakable rhythm of two people pulling the same cart side by side. And as you crawl into bed that first week, sore and full and quietly terrified, you know you've crossed into a new season of life. Not grand, not shiny, but sacred. And that is more than enough. The baby comes in late spring just as the apple trees start to flower, and the mornings go from frostbitten to merely chilly. You've been counting the months carefully, whispering prayers in the candlelight, watching your wife's belly swell slowly beneath her apron. It's not something you talk about much, not out loud. That would feel like tempting fate. But every time she winces while standing up or grips the table with both hands after dinner, you feel it. That tight knot in your chest that has nothing to do with nerves and everything to do with love. You've prepared as best you can. The midwife, a plain but sharp-eyed woman from 2 farms over, has been visiting weekly. She doesn't use a doctor's bag, just a woven basket filled with jars and cloth and a bone-handled knife that's probably seen more babies than most modern hospitals. There's no anaesthesia, no epidural, no sterile gloves or fetal monitors, just warm towels, boiled water, and years of passed-down wisdom you can't learn from any book. The birth begins before sunrise. Of course it does. You're halfway through gathering firewood when your wife calls out, voice calm but urgent. You rush inside, all pretense of stoicism gone, and the next 12 hours blur into a mix of tension, sweat, whispered prayers, and the quiet, relentless push of life into the world. You're not expected to stay in the room. Tradition usually keeps men nearby but out of sight. But you do anyway, because she asked you to. You hold her hand, wipe her forehead, murmur whatever small comforts come to mind while the midwife works with silent, steady hands. Your wife doesn't scream, she doesn't cry, she grits her teeth, breathes through the pain, and brings your child into the world with a strength you didn't know existed. The baby is born just after noon. Red-faced, wriggling, already angry. A girl. The midwife wraps her in linen, then hands her to your wife, who holds her like something sacred and fragile and entirely hers. You watch them together, mother and child, bound in sweat and blood and silence, and feel a strange ache behind your eyes. You're a father now, and that means everything changes. Infant care in your world doesn't come with books or parental leave or tiny onesies with forest animal prints. It comes with routines, discipline, and the full weight of the community's expectations. Your wife rests for a few days, less than she needs, probably. But then life presses forward. There's bread to bake, laundry to do. You try to help where you can, but the cows still need milking and the fields won't plough themselves. Your newborn daughter sleeps in a wooden cradle you built during the winter, carved by the lantern light, joints fitted without nails, polished with beeswax until it gleamed. You didn't decorate it. That would be prideful, but you did notch a tiny cross into the bottom, just one where no one but you will see. She cries at night, of course, or you rock her beside the fire, whispering hymns, pacing until your feet feel like wood. You doze with her against your chest, her tiny fists bunched against your collar. Your wife wakes every few hours to feed her, and though she never complains, you can see the tiredness behind her eyes. You wish you could do more, but even this shared fatigue feels like a gift. And then there's the illness. It starts with a small cough, then a wheeze, then a night of fever that leaves her skin hot and dry as kindling. Your heart pounds as you sit beside her cradle, dipping cloths into cool water. watching her chest rise and fall in short, desperate gasps. The midwife comes again, bringing a mixture of herbs and a poultice made from mustard seed and lard. She places it on the baby's chest and mutters a short prayer in dialect. You light a candle and set it in the window, a quiet call to your neighbours. They come without being asked, some bringing soup, others sitting in silence, holding your other children on their laps, occupying them with quiet stories and songs so your wife can rest. This is how it works. You give when others are in need. You receive when it's your turn. And here's your historical fact. In 17th century Amish life, sickness was treated not with modern medicine, but with a blend of herbal remedies, old European folk practices, and prayer. There were no hospitals, no trained doctors, just midwives, healers, and the strength of the community. Feverfew, yarrow, and elderberry were common. Mustard plasters and onion poultices were standard, and when those failed, all that remained was faith. Your daughter recovers, slowly. The fever breaks on the third night. Her breathing evens out, and by morning she's nursing again, as if nothing ever happened. You thank God in silence, not with shouted hallelujahs, but with a bowed head and shaking hands. You realise now how thin the thread of life is, and how strong the hands that hold it must be. But not every child makes it. There's a grave near the edge of the field, just a small mound of earth with a simple wooden cross, no name, no inscription. It belongs to your neighbour's son, who died the winter before from an infection that started in his finger and spread to his blood. He was 5. Your own parents buried 2 children back in Europe. The soil here holds more stories than stones. Infant mortality is high. Everyone knows this. That's why children aren't named right away in some families. Why they're wrapped in simplicity. Why love is shown in care, not possession. You don't get to take life for granted. Not ever. Here's a fringe fact. Some early Amish communities believed that placing a Bible beneath a child's cradle offered protection from sickness. Others would tuck a small scrap of paper inscribed with a blessing into the child's bonnet or crib, folded 3 times and never touched again. A blend of superstition and faith, perhaps. But when your child is burning with fever and no help is coming, you try anything. You settle into a new rhythm. Feedings, changings, short moments of peace between waves of fatigue. Your wife sings while she works, soft, ancient hymns that echo through the kitchen and seem to settle the baby better than any blanket. You carry her in your arms while walking the rows of seedlings in the garden, pointing out weeds like they matter. And you wonder what kind of world this daughter will grow up in. Will she marry? Will she learn to sew, to bake, to raise children of her own? Or will she question the Ordnung, challenge the rules, crave something beyond the fields and fences? You don't know. You can't know. All you can do is raise her the best way you know how, with structure, with care, with the steady warmth of a life rooted in something deeper than yourself. As night falls again, and the oil lamp flickers low, you rock her in your arms and hum the same hymn your father once sang to you. She closes her eyes, her fingers curl around yours, and you realise that in a world where so much is fragile, this quiet moment, is solid as stone. It's a clear, bright morning, the kind that almost tricks you into thinking the world is simple. The birds are louder than they should be, the sky's an impossible blue, and the breeze smells like fresh-cut hay and sun-warmed earth. You're fixing a fence post that gave up sometime in the night when you spot them. 2 English men riding the path toward your land, their clothes too bright, their horses too clean, their voices too loud. You straighten up slowly and wipe your hands on your apron, preparing your face like you do for church. Not blank exactly, but unreadable. They wave first, of course. English always wave. You return a small nod, already tense, not because you're in danger exactly, but because this never ends in just pleasantries. Sure enough, as they dismount and approach, one of them, tall, red-faced, with the kind of smile that feels more like a transaction, opens with the usual. "You folks building a new barn up this way?" he says, already glancing past you toward the stack of lumber near the field. "Heard from town. Good-sized crew. Could use hands like that in Harrisburg." You nod again, but don't answer. That's your right. Just because someone talks to you doesn't mean you owe them anything in return, especially not someone English. The other man tries a different route. "Name's Miller," he offers. "We're with the Land Commission. We check boundary lines and help keep things smooth between parcels. Don't worry, we're not taxmen." He laughs like that's a joke you're supposed to get. You don't laugh back. It's not that you hate them, you just don't trust them, not fully. The English are kind enough most of the time, but they have this habit of getting curious, of pushing, of assuming you'll come around eventually. And when you don't, when you hold fast to the Ordnung, when you build without nails, when you speak your German dialect and avoid their roads, they start to see you not as quaint, but as rude, mysterious, maybe even dangerous. You learned this long ago. Back in Europe, curiosity turned into suspicion, and suspicion turned into persecution. Now, here in Pennsylvania, you try not to give them a reason. The men stay longer than you'd like, asking about crops, weather, trade, so you answer only when necessary. Short, polite, nothing more. One of them points at your son, barefoot in the garden, and asks, "He go to school?" You nod once. "Taught here," you add, just enough to shut down the next question. He raises his eyebrows like that's novel, then turns to your wife hanging laundry nearby. "Pretty day for it," he says, too friendly. She doesn't look up, just keeps pinning shirts to the line, methodical and unbothered. That's the right response. The Ordnung teaches that interaction with the outside world should be minimal, courteous, and above all separate. You do not invite English into your home, you do not sit and chat, you do not accept their gifts. Everything has meaning, and even a friendly visit has weight. Eventually they leave, boots crunching down the path, their laughter drifting behind them like perfume. You watch until they're gone, then pick up your tools again. Your son glances at you. You say nothing, he already knows. That evening, during supper, the conversation circles back around. "Why don't we speak to them more?" one of the children asks. A fair question. You pause, spoon halfway to your mouth, and answer, simply, "'Cause we're not like them." You explain it the way your father did. Slowly, clearly, like carving something into soft wood. The English live by the world's rules. They chase comfort. They change with the times. They build things that look pretty but break quickly. They talk fast, want quick answers, love progress more than they love peace. It's not that they're bad, but their way isn't your way. And the Ordnung is clear, separation is not just about lifestyle, it's about survival. Every compromise chips away at the foundation. One visit leads to small talk leads to influence leads to adaptation, and adaptation leads to forgetting who you are. Here's your historical insight. In the late 17th century, Amish communities didn't build massive walls or barricades. They didn't arm themselves. Their boundary was much quieter. Culture, language, clothing, silence, a refusal to conform. And while English settlers often admired their work ethic and discipline, they also saw them as other. Not dangerous necessarily, but definitely odd. And nothing provokes suspicion like consistent, quiet resistance. Sometimes, of course, contact is unavoidable. You buy tools from English blacksmiths. You trade cloth or milk for salt or sugar. But it's all done on your terms. You speak plainly. You pay fairly. You do not linger. And when the English ask questions, especially about your faith, you answer only what's necessary. Not to be rude, but because our truth isn't for sale. It's for living. And here's your quirky fact for tonight. In some early settlements, Amish families would intentionally plant trees or hedges between their farms and English neighbours, not for privacy, but as a visual reminder. A living boundary, an act of silent, leafy defiance. Still, there are moments of softness. An English child wanders into your field one day, lost and crying. You give him a cup of water and walk him home. His mother thanks you with too many words. You nod, say God be with you, walk away. Another time, a neighbour's barn catches fire, and without hesitation, your entire community arrives with buckets and hands and prayers. You don't need to speak the same language to carry water, but there's a line. Always a line. You never invite them in. You don't marry them. You don't borrow their tools. You don't listen to their music or read their books or let their ways take root in your home. It's not hatred. It's discipline. A wall made of silence and shared memory and the knowledge that compromise, once started, doesn't know how to stop. Some in your community disagree, quietly, of course. They think you could be friendlier, that maybe the English aren't so different, that maybe there's room for a little more openness. You listen, you nod, you say nothing, and you carry on as before. Here's the scholarly debate. Were early Amish communities isolationist out of fear or conviction? Some historians argue their separation was trauma-born, a reaction to centuries of persecution. Others believe it was a deliberate theological stance, built not on fear of the world, but faith in the alternative. Either way, the effect was the same. They endured, and they remained. That night, as the lanterns burn low and your children drift to sleep, you sit at the window and watch the road, empty now. quiet. But you know they'll come again, the English, with their questions, their smiles, their well-meaning curiosity, and when they do, you'll meet them with the same thing you always have, a nod, a silence, and a wall they'll never quite see but always feel. It's a Thursday morning when you hear the bell, not a loud one, just a small iron handbell rung softly from the front yard of the neighbour's house. That's the signal. School's in session, or, to be more precise, the schoolhouse is open. Whether anyone learns anything today, well, that's up to the children, the weather, and whether the boys stop daring each other to chew sour dock leaves again. The schoolhouse itself isn't much. One room, unpainted, with rough-hewn benches and a stove that only halfway works. The windows are small and crooked, the chalkboard has a permanent scratch across the middle, and the bell hangs from a nail that was hammered in just slightly off-centre, like someone gave up halfway through. But it's here, and for that you're grateful. Your son carries his slate under one arm and a piece of bread with the other. He's wearing boots that don't quite match, and his hat's too big, but he walks with a sense of duty that makes your chest tighten just a bit. He's 10 now, almost a man, but today he'll spend 5 hours trying to figure out how to spell plow in 3 different languages. Because here's the thing, Amish education isn't about testing or diplomas or prepping for college. It's about knowing enough to live a godly, orderly, useful life. You need to read scripture, you need to write lists and letters and, if necessary, a formal apology to the bishop. You need arithmetic so you don't get cheated at market, and penmanship so your children can read your records long after you're gone. That's the goal. Nothing more. Nothing less. Inside, the schoolmaster greets the children with a nod. He's not overly warm, smiles are for after lessons, but he's fair. He's Amish too, of course. Always a man from within the district. And usually a farmer first, teacher second. He doesn't teach because he's passionate about education. He teaches because someone has to, and it's his turn. The children sit on the benches, girls on one side, boys on the other. The younger ones wiggle and whisper. The older ones try to act too serious to laugh at the word hymnals. The day begins with a prayer in German, spoken in a unified, slurred monotone that only makes sense if you grew up hearing it. Then the reading begins. They study German first, High German, the language of the Bible and the hymns, then Pennsylvania Dutch, the spoken dialect, and finally English for the world beyond the fence line. 3 languages, none of them optional. And the tricky part? The children know instinctively which one to use with whom. German to the elders, Dutch at home, English for trade or when someone from the outside shows up asking for directions. The lessons are simple, words written on the board, slates scratched with chalk, numbers copied, added, subtracted. The teacher walks between the rows, occasionally tapping a mistake with the end of his stick. Not hard, just enough to redirect focus. He doesn't shame, doesn't shout, but there's authority in his silence. And the students respect it. Mostly. Your daughter is 6, perched near the front, her tongue poking out slightly as she traces each letter with careful precision. Her G's are still suspiciously close to Q's, but she's trying. She likes the feel of chalk in her hand. She's memorised Psalm 23 and can recite it in both German and English, though she sometimes swaps rod and staff without realising it. There's no science, no history, no art beyond what naturally spills out in the margins of a spelling list. You don't learn about the wider world. No talk of monarchies or wars or colonies rising in the south. Those things belong to the English. Here, knowledge is functional, not decorative. Here's your historical nugget. Formal Amish education in the 17th century was rare, even controversial. Some communities resisted it entirely, fearing that too much learning would breed pride or discontent. Others embraced minimal schooling for practicality's sake. But almost all agreed on one thing. Higher education was unnecessary, dangerous even, a gateway to pride, debate and leaving the community. So while a child might learn to read fluently by age 12, their schooling often ended shortly after. And here's your fringe fact. Some early Amish believed that excessive reading, even scripture, could be spiritually harmful, if not balanced by lived obedience. That knowledge without humility made you a worldly fool, so children were taught to read the Bible, yes, but slowly, carefully, one verse at a time, like handling fire. At lunchtime, the children go outside and sit in groups, pulling out whatever scraps were packed for them. Bread, maybe a hard-boiled egg, a slice of dried apple, a piece of jerky if they're lucky. They eat with fingers, pass around a shared water dipper, and throw stones at an imaginary line drawn in the dirt. There's no playground, just the world. Trees, stumps, rocks. It's enough. Your son climbs a tree during break and rips his shirt. The teacher says nothing, just hands him a needle and thread and tells him to fix it at home. Lesson learned. As the day ends, the children sing a hymn, slow, nasal, reverent. Then they recite one last prayer, and the bell rings again, a soft final note that tells the world this part of the day is done. Your children walk home in pairs, scuffling through the dust arguing about which verse came from which chapter. You greet them on the path, take their slates, and ask what they learned. They shrug, smile. Not much, Ver, your son says, but you know better. He's already working on his handwriting after dinner, scratching letters into the soft side of a wood plank for practice. There's a peace to it, even with all its limits. They are not being groomed for ambition, for wealth, for invention. They're being shaped for community, for simplicity, for obedience. And here's the debate. Did the Amish intentionally suppress intellectual growth, or simply guard against arrogance? Some scholars argue that limited education preserved humility and unity. Others think it stunted curiosity. But within the community, the answer was always simple. What good is knowledge if it makes you leave the people who taught you? That night you read a psalm aloud while your children lean in, eyes heavy with sleep. The room is warm, the air still, the words ancient. And before the last verse is finished, your daughter is asleep in your lap, a soft smile on her lips, her forehead smudged with chalk. It's baking day, and your wife has been up since before the first rooster even thought about crowing. The oven's been fired since dawn, the coals pushed just right to the back of the hearth, and the dough, 6 massive rounds of it, rises in a bowl big enough to bathe a toddler. The air is already heavy with the smell of yeast and wood smoke, and flour floats in the kitchen like snow caught mid-fall. There's no wasted movement in her body as she works, rolling, shaping, lifting, folding. It's muscle memory now. She doesn't measure, barely looks, barely speaks. You help where you can, hauling water, bringing in firewood, lifting the baking stones, but she's in charge here, and everyone knows it. There's a quiet authority in her rhythm, in the way the children fall in line when she gives a look, not a word. And here's the secret you've known for years but never quite say out loud. She may be submissive by the Ordnung's definition, but she runs this house like a ship captain who doesn't need to shout. Not out of pride, not out of rebellion, out of necessity, out of love. The community believes in male leadership, sure. The Ordnung says so. Men are heads of the household, the spiritual guides, the final words of the king. But that doesn't mean women are weak. Not even close. In your home, she's the engine. She keeps the fire lit, the children clothed, the food hot, the garden alive, and the laundry line snapping in the breeze. She teaches the girls how to patch clothes, how to pray before every meal, and how to carry 3 crying children on one hip while kneading dough with the other. She doesn't preach, she doesn't argue, but when she speaks, people listen. After the bread goes into the oven, she starts on the next task, sewing. The children are growing again, like weeds, and winter clothes don't make themselves. Her sewing kit is a wooden box passed down from her mother, filled with simple tools, a few needles, spools of dark thread, a pair of shears with a chipped handle, and fabric scraps organised in folded stacks that look more like sacred texts than leftovers. She sews in the kitchen, because that's where the heat is, and because even now she's listening for the baby's whimper, or the goat's surprise scream from the barn. You watch her for a moment as she threads the needle. Her fingers are quick, stained from dye and dirt, her eyes scanning for flaws even as she hums under her breath. You don't interrupt, you just bring her a cup of tea and set it beside her. She doesn't look up, but you catch the tiniest curve of a smile at the corner of her mouth. Your daughters, one 10 and the other just learning to braid, sit nearby, sorting buttons and measuring fabric. They mirror their mother's movements, clumsily but earnestly. The eldest already sews a straight seam, the youngest still thinks scissors are magic. They'll both be ready far too soon, and you're not prepared for how fast it's happening. And here's your historical fact. In 17th century Amish households, women were not just homemakers. They were providers, organisers, and often the backbone of the family economy. While men worked the fields and led in spiritual matters, women managed the home with a complexity that outsiders rarely noticed. Their work was invisible in public but indispensable in private. After the sewing comes soap making. You can smell it before you even round the corner of the house. Sharp, pungent, sour and clean all at once. She's boiling animal fat with lye in a giant kettle, stirring with a stick long enough to double as a fence post. The mixture bubbles like something alive. and the children wrinkle their noses, but help anyway, dropping in ashes or gathering rainwater to cool it down. Soap is made in big batches because it's messy and dangerous, and best done all at once. She pours it into moulds to cool wooden frames lined with oiled cloth, then cuts the bars with a wire once they've hardened. No scents, no colours, no shapes carved in, just clean square blocks that'll last months, chipped into slivers for bathing, scrubbing, laundry. While it cools, she takes a break, barely. A piece of bread, a sip of water, a moment to nurse the baby before she's back on her feet again. The boys are arguing about who gets to chase the chickens into the pen, and she settles it with one glance. They obey. They always do. You remember when she first came into your home, nervous, quiet, unsure where to set her shoes. You'd only spoken a dozen times before marriage. You were strangers in a room full of witnesses, and now you'd trust her with your life. You do, every day. Here's the quirky fact. Among some Amish women of that era, it was common to keep a silent journal. A small folded bundle of cloth inside which they stitched tiny symbols with coloured thread. Each symbol stood for something. A good harvest, a healthy birth, a lost friend. It wasn't writing, that might seem too proud, but it was still a record, a hidden language only they could read. A quiet kind of rebellion, or maybe just memory made tangible. That evening the bread comes out of the oven, golden and cracked just right. The whole house smells like comfort. She breaks a loaf and hands pieces to each of the children, who chew while wiping crumbs on their sleeves. You eat yours with butter, sitting together on the back steps as the sun sinks behind the fields. She leans her head against your shoulder just for a second. And here's the debate. Does submission mean weakness or strength in restraint? Outsiders always get this wrong. They assume that because Amish women wear plain dresses, cover their heads, and don't speak loudly in meetings, they must be oppressed. But anyone who's ever lived in one of these homes knows better. Amish women don't rule with voices. They rule with presence, with endurance, with the unshakable quiet force of someone who doesn't need to be seen to be felt. Later, after the children are asleep and the dishes are washed, you sit together by the fire. She stitches while you read scripture aloud. Occasionally, she corrects your pronunciation. You don't mind. She's usually right. You glance over at her hands, still working, still moving, still shaping the world in ways no one will write down, but everyone will remember. And you think, the Ordnung may guide your house, but she keeps it. You're fixing the hinges on the smokehouse door when you hear the knock. Not loud, not hurried, just 3 gentle raps on the frame of your front porch. You pause, straighten your back, and wipe your hands on your apron, already knowing this won't be a casual visit. It's never a casual visit when it's them, the elders. 2 men, both grey-bearded and dressed in coats a little darker than yours, step forward when you open the door. Their hats stay on, but their eyes are calm and steady. They greet you with a nod, not a smile. That's how this starts. You invite them in, of course. Your wife, quick as ever, disappears into the kitchen without being asked. She knows what this is. She returns a few moments later with bread and coffee and a stillness in her hands that tells you she's praying with every movement. The elders accept the refreshments but don't eat yet. They're here for something else. It's a talk, not a punishment. Not yet, but something has reached their ears. A whisper, a concern. Maybe it's about your brother's new buggy, the one with the shiny brass fittings. Maybe it's about that boy in the district who's been growing his hair too long. Maybe it's about your own daughter, who was seen walking with an English girl. Only once, only at the edge of the fence line, but that's enough. The Ordnung has been disturbed. Not broken necessarily, but nudged. And the Ordnung, this invisible fence around the community, around your life, is sacred. It's not written down anywhere, not officially. There's no pamphlet, no commandments etched into stone. It lives in memory, in habit, in example, and yet everyone knows it as surely as they know the Lord's Prayer. And when someone steps outside of it, even by an inch, everyone feels the shift. The elders speak gently. They're not here to accuse, they're here to remind. They ask questions, slowly, like carving wood. Have you noticed any changes? Have you spoken with your daughter? Do you think your brother understands what brass fittings say about pride? You nod. You respond. You offer what clarity you can. They're not angry, but they're watchful. This is how it works. Not with punishments, but with conversation. With careful correction. The community guides itself, not from the top down, but from the inside out. Here's your historical fact. The Ordnung, though often described as a set of rules, is better understood as a way of life, a living agreement between the individual and the community. In the 16th century, each district had its own version, tailored to its size, its elders, and its interpretations of scripture. It evolved slowly, cautiously through consensus and repetition. And though never codified in ink, its power was absolute. The conversation turns to your youngest son. He's been carving toys with too much detail. Little wooden animals with realistic faces, ears, tails. It seems harmless, creative even. But the elders worry, rightly, that the act of shaping something beautiful for its own sake leans too close to pride, to ornament, to the world. You breathe in deeply and nod again. You understand. You'll talk to him, and you will, because while your instincts might want to push back just a little, just once, you know what's at stake. This isn't about toys. It's about direction. A single stone in the wrong place now becomes a cracked foundation later. And if you bend the Ordnung for one child, one choice, you risk teaching the next that bending is not only allowed, but expected. And then, of course, there's Meidung, the shunning. It's the final step, the last resort. A person who breaks the Ordnung and refuses correction may be cut off, not out of hatred, but out of love twisted into sorrow. No meals shared, no handshakes, no trade, not even a seat at the family table. They are still spoken of, still prayed for, but not engaged with, not until repentance is made. You've seen it once, a young man years ago who began wearing English boots and reading English books. He argued, defended his choices, refused to yield, and so after many visits and many prayers, he was shunned. You still remember his mother crying quietly into her apron while the rest of the family sat at dinner, the extra chair empty, his name not spoken aloud. He never came back. And here's the quirky fact. In some communities, if a shunned individual returned repentant, they would stand outside the home during Sunday service, listening through an open window before being formally welcomed back with a handshake from every member of the congregation. One by one, a ritual of reacceptance as powerful as the exclusion had been. The elders finish their coffee. They thank your wife. They place a hand on your shoulder, heavy and warm. You're not in trouble, but you're on notice. The fence was touched. They leave without ceremony, and you stand at the door watching them go, their steps slow, deliberate. Later that evening you speak with your son. You kneel beside his wooden box home of animals and gently pick up a fox he carved. It's good. Too good. You tell him the truth. There's skill in your hands, but skill must serve humility. He looks confused, hurt, but he listens. That's the beginning. Gather the family after supper. You talk openly about the Ordnung, not like a tyrant, but like a shepherd. You remind them of why you live this way, why plainness matters, why simplicity is sacred. It's not about avoiding joy. It's about resisting the self. It's about honouring the community that gives you food, faith, identity. Your youngest daughter leans against your side. Your wife nods quietly. Your eldest son watches the candle flame with a furrowed brow, thinking deeper than his age. And here's the debate. Do communities grow stronger by bending their rules or holding firm? Modern scholars argue both sides. Some claim the Ordnung stifles growth. Others insist it's what allowed the Amish to endure for centuries. But within the community, there's little confusion. Flexibility is the way of the English. Steadiness is your strength. You go to bed that night heavier than usual. The weight of leadership isn't loud, but it lingers. You stare at the ceiling, hand resting against your chest, and pray not for ease, but for clarity, for steadiness, for the wisdom to know when to bend and when to stand still. Because here, obedience is not just an act, it's an inheritance, and every day you choose it again. The first snow comes early this year, heavy and wet and full of that quiet authority that stops everyone mid-sentence. It falls steadily through the night, blanketing the fields, burying fence posts and muting the morning into something that feels holy. By the time you step outside, breath fogging and boots sinking into the soft crust, the world is washed clean, turned plain white in every direction. Even the barn looks different, like it's hiding something behind that sheet of snow. It's December, and that means Christmas is coming, or rather, Holy Day, as your people call it. But don't mistake that for what the English mean when they say it. There are no trees in the corner of the room, no garlands strung around the windows, no pine-scented candles or jingling bells. The word festive doesn't really apply here. If anything, it's the opposite. Quiet, sombre, still. Just the way it's supposed to be. You carry a bundle of firewood into the house and set it beside the stove, shaking the snow from your coat before hanging it on the peg. Inside, the house is already warm, not with tinsel or carols or cinnamon-spiced anything, but with the slow, gentle heat of something sacred being prepared. Your wife is baking. Not cookies shaped like stars or candy canes, no, that would be too fanciful. She's baking loaves of Christopsomo, a traditional bread made with a cross slashed into the top and a dusting of flour that settles into the creases like frost. It's dense and simple, and she bakes only a few, just enough for the holy day morning meal and maybe one or two to take to the neighbours. Nothing is wasted, nothing is done for show. The children are quieter too. Even the youngest seem to sense the shift. They're not bouncing off the walls begging for presents. There are no presents. That's not part of this world. Gifts, if they happen at all, are practical. A new pair of mittens, a jar of jam, a scarf someone knitted in secret during the long evenings, and even these are given quietly, almost reluctantly, as if too much attention might turn them into vanity. The house is clean, extra clean, floors swept, windows wiped, everything in its place now. It's not about impressing anyone, it's about reverence. This is not a time for laziness, for clutter, or for noise. This is the celebration of Christ's birth, and it demands stillness, not spectacle. Here's your historical fact. Early Amish celebrations of Christmas were stripped of nearly every European tradition that could be linked to worldly behaviour. No St. Nicholas, no Yule logs, no mistletoe. December 25th was a day for worship and reflection, not merrymaking. And some families, even within the community, disagreed on how much acknowledgement the day should receive. There was no standard, just shared intent, simplicity and devotion. You gather with your family on the morning of the 25th, all dressed in your best but still plain clothes. There is no gift exchange, no stockings, no ornaments. Instead, you open the day with a prayer the same as any Sunday. Though today the words linger just a little longer in the still air. You read from Luke, the birth story. Slowly, solemnly. The children listen with wide eyes as if they're hearing it for the first time. Breakfast follows, bread, milk, eggs, a bit of cheese. Simple but served with care. The bread is broken by hand, passed around the table without a word. No one rushes. The quiet is not uncomfortable. It's comforting. You finish the meal with a final prayer, then return to the work of the day. But not the usual labour. Today is a day of rest. The cows still need milking, the fire still needs tending, but beyond that the chores are few. The fields are sound-mint under the snow, and the tools stay hanging on the barn wall. Later in the morning you walk to a neighbour's house, boots crunching through the snow. You carry one of your wife's loaves wrapped in cloth. It's not a gift exactly, more a gesture. A shared moment. They welcome you in. The house is warm, the smell of baking lingering in the corners. You sit quietly, sip coffee, talk about nothing important. There's laughter, but it's soft. No jokes about Santa or reindeer, just the joy of presence. And here's the quirky fact. In some early communities, children were given a single piece of fruit, an orange if it could be found, as a Christmas treat. It was exotic, bright and rare, a luxury saved for the holiest day of the year. Some even tucked them under their pillows for safekeeping, not to eat but to treasure. A reminder that even sweetness could be sacred. There's no official church service today. That comes on the Sunday closest to Christmas. But you do pray more than usual. You read scripture with the children. Your wife sings a hymn while peeling potatoes for supper. It's not caroling. It's not even meant to be heard. But you stand in the doorway for a moment just to listen. Heart full in a way that has nothing to do with lights or tinsel or sleigh bells. As the sun sets and the snow glows faintly in the fading light, the children sit by the stove with their books and slates doodling quietly. Your youngest tries to draw a sheep. It ends up looking like a potato with legs, but he's proud of it. He says it's one of the ones near the manger, and your heart breaks a little in the best way. You share a simple supper, stew and bread again, with a small portion of apple preserves for dessert. It's more sugar than usual, and the children light up like candles when they taste it. A celebration without excess, joy without munham noise. And here's the scholarly debate. Some historians argue the Amish rejection of traditional Christmas customs was a reaction to Catholic and Lutheran pageantry, an intentional step away from the show of European religion. Others believe it was simply an extension of their plain lifestyle. But whatever the origin, the result was the same. Christmas became less about what you gave and more about what you laid down. You end the day with prayer, together in a circle, hands folded, voices low. You thank God for warmth, for food, for each other, for the stillness. And afterward, the children are tucked into bed, the candles blown out one by one, the house falling into darkness not with dread but with peace. Outside the snow continues to fall, and inside the silence is the holiest thing you've heard all day. It's a Thursday, and that means it's your turn. Every family in the district takes one, and this week the bench wagon rattled down your road and stopped in front of your house. You heard it coming from halfway across the field, the slow clatter of wooden wheels, the soft creak of beams too old to groan. It parked near the barn and left behind what it always does. 20 rough pine benches, a hymn book crate, and a single nod from the driver that said, "See you Sunday." It's your turn to host church. Hosting isn't optional. It rotates like the seasons, steady and sure, and when it's your time, you don't argue. You clean, you cook, you move furniture. You prepare your soul, because hosting church isn't just a logistical duty, it's spiritual, sacred, a full-body act of humility. Your home becomes a sanctuary. Your walls become witness. You've done this before, so you know the steps. First, everything in the main room gets cleared out, benches in, tables out, rugs rolled up. The children help, lugging hymnals in stacks and arranging cups on trays for after the service. Your wife spends 2 full days cleaning corners no one will see. She's wiping baseboards like they personally offended her. She irons the aprons with more focus than she gave her own wedding dress. The stove is polished, the soap dish is refilled, even the windows get scraped with vinegar until the glass looks like air. No one will comment, no one will praise. That's not why she does it. On Saturday night, the benches are all in place. 2 long rows, men on one side, women on the other, facing each other like a courtroom where no one is on trial. A small table stands in front for the preacher. There is no altar, no candles, no iconography, just wood and silence and the sense that tomorrow God will be here and he doesn't need decorations. Here's your historical fact. In 17th century Amish communities, church was held in homes or barns, not in buildings marked church. This was part theological conviction, part logistical necessity. The early Amish believed that sacredness came from gathering in God's name, not from ornate spaces. A barn with hay on the floor was just as holy as a cathedral, maybe more. You rise early Sunday morning before the sun to start the stove and prepare the coffee. Real coffee, thick and dark and brewed in a pot the size of a soup kettle. Your wife bakes apple schnitz, warms rolls, slices cheese. There's no feast planned, but after 3 hours of preaching and prayer, a shared meal becomes something close to divine. The first buggies arrive just after sunrise, wheels hissing against the frost. Neighbours file in, removing their coats silently, nodding to one another. The children are hushed, either by training or by the weight of what's about to happen. People greet with a handshake, a soft good morning, and a seat on the bench that seems pre-assigned by years of quiet choreography. There are no instruments, no choir, just voices, deep, slow, ancient. The hymns begin low and long, drawn out in that distinct Amish style where syllables stretch like taffy. Each word takes its time. You've sung these hymns since childhood. You don't need to see the page to know what comes next. You feel it in your bones. The preacher doesn't stand at first. He waits, lets the silence speak. Then he rises, opens the Bible, and reads, not to impress, not to argue, but to instruct. He speaks in High German. The children don't understand every word, but they listen anyway, because everyone does. Because this is not entertainment. It's not about feeling something. It's about being present, being still, being obedient. And here's your fringe fact. Some Amish services include a silent confession, where everyone sits quietly to reflect on personal sin. No one speaks, no one confesses aloud, but everyone knows what's happening. It's not performative, it's deeply personal, a group solitude, somehow shared. You watch your children during the service. The older ones sit with straight backs, eyes fixed forward. The younger ones fidget, shift, fight off sleep. Your daughter nods off briefly against her mother's shoulder. She'll learn. It's all part of the formation. No child enjoys 3-hour sermons, but they grow into it, into the patience, the stillness, the discipline. It's a slow education in how to sit with yourself and your creator at the same time. When the preaching ends, the prayer begins, long, looping, reverent. You bow your head and press your hands together. There are no requests in this prayer. Just thanks, praise, submission. Your knees ache from sitting, but your heart is full in a way that no music or stage lights could ever replicate. After the final hymn, the room shifts, benches are pushed back, the meal is set out, and the hum of soft conversation returns. No gossip, no boasting, just simple talk, weather, harvest, fence repairs, family news. You stand by the stove, passing out cups of coffee, watching the way your home fills with warmth that has nothing to do with fire. And here's the scholarly debate. Why did the Amish choose such long, austere services, even when other Anabaptists began to adapt and shorten theirs? Some believe it was to resist emotionalism, keeping the focus on endurance and obedience. Others argue it was about spiritual economy. If you gather only every other week, you make it count. The guests stay for a while, no one's in a rush. Church isn't a box to check, it's the core of the week. The children play outside, careful not to shout. The elders talk in low tones about an upcoming baptism. You overhear someone mention your son's recent efforts in school. His letters are strong, they say. You smile into your cup. Eventually the buggies begin to depart. One by one, families return to their own lives, their own chores, their own preparations for next week's turn to host. The benches will be loaded back into the wagon tomorrow. You'll sweep the floors again, fold the linens, return the room to its usual shape. But something lingers in the air, a residue of reverence. That night, as you sit by the stove with your boots off and your shoulders finally relaxed, your wife leans over and says, "It went well today." You nod, and you mean it. Not because everything was perfect, not because the bread didn't burn or the children didn't squirm, but because you remembered what mattered. Because you made space. And because the Ordnung is not just rules on paper, it's benches in a room, bread passed from hand to hand, a prayer said aloud while a child leans against her mother's side. That's church, not a place, a people. It's mid-March and the thaw has begun, not the big, triumphant kind where flowers pop up overnight and the birds return in full chorus, but the early awkward thaw, the slow drip from the eaves, the patches of mud spreading like spilled molasses between stubborn clumps of snow. Everything smells like damp earth and wet wood. You squint at the sky and hope the sun holds steady for once. It doesn't. You trudge back inside anyway, boots heavy with slush, and leave a trail on the floor your wife will quietly scowl at before scrubbing away without a word. Spring on an Amish farm doesn't begin with a date. It starts with movement, with checking fence lines, with cleaning out the barn loft, with unearthing tools that have slept all winter under tarps and dust. You haul the plough from the shed, inspect the leather straps, oil the joints. The metal has a few new patches of rust. Nothing fatal. You scrape it off and carry on. The horses are restless too. They stomp a little harder when you bring them hay, as if they can smell the soil waking up. And they're right, it is waking up. You can feel it in the way your boots don't quite stick in place anymore. In the way your younger son spends more time outside than inside, chasing chickens through the mud and coming home covered in regret. But spring also means one thing more urgent than planting, more sacred than the first green sprout. Preparing for baptism. Your eldest daughter is 16 now. The decision has been hers to make, and she's taken her time, longer than some, but you've never pressured. The Ordnung is clear. No one is forced into faith. Obedience without choice is just fear with a haircut. She's quiet about it. But when she told your wife last week, her voice didn't shake. "I'm ready," she said, and you believed her. Now, the instruction begins. Baptism isn't a simple ritual. It's a commitment, heavier than the horse yoke and deeper than the snowdrifts just starting to retreat. It's the formal entry into the church, into Gelassenheit, that deep submission of self to community, to God, to the Ordnung. Once baptized, there is no backing out, not without consequences. It is as permanent as a marriage and often more watched. She'll spend weeks now in council with the deacon and preacher, studying scripture, discussing her understanding of the church's teachings, reviewing the Ordnung in all its unwritten firmness. You'll attend some of the meetings, not to pressure, but to support. You'll sit beside her in silence, watch the way she listens, the way she answers with clear eyes and no flinching. And here's your historical fact. In 17th century Amish communities, adult baptism was the defining line between in and out. Unlike infant baptism, which they rejected outright, this choice was seen as the ultimate expression of faith. It was the same belief that got their ancestors imprisoned, tortured, drowned in rivers by state churches who saw refusal as rebellion. So when your daughter kneels to receive water on her head, she's not just joining a church, she's standing with centuries of resistance. The baptism is set for Pentecost year, as tradition dictates, a time of renewal, of spirit, of starting over, but she begins preparing long before the fields are dry enough to plough. Every evening after supper, she reads, not just scripture, but the Martyr's Mirror, that thick, brutal book filled with stories of men and women who bled for what she's about to step into. She reads about Dirk Willems, who turned back to save his pursuer from a frozen lake, only to be executed anyway. She reads and she weeps, quietly. You pretend not to notice, but you do, and you're proud. Here's the quirky fact. Some Amish candidates for baptism were once asked to memorize entire chapters of scripture, not to recite them in public, but to dwell in them privately. There are rumours of girls who stitched verses into their aprons or tucked psalms into the hems of their bonnets, like armour you couldn't see but always wore. As the weeks pass, your daughter grows more focused. She speaks less, listens more. She helps with the younger children, tends the fire without being asked, stays late after Sunday gatherings to clean up even though it's no longer her chore rotation. You can see it, yes, something is changing. Or maybe something is settling, anchoring. Her will is still strong, but it's been tempered, reshaped, like metal softened in the forge, then cooled slowly until it shines. And here comes the debate, one you hear murmured in corners sometimes, even among the elders. Should baptism be done younger? Earlier, before the pull of the English world becomes too loud? Or older, when the choice is more certain? Some argue 16 is too young, that a teenager can't possibly understand the weight of a lifetime promise. Others say waiting risks losing them altogether, that delaying obedience opens the door to doubt. But within your family, you know this. She chose this. Not for you, not for the preacher, for herself. The snow begins to vanish in earnest by April. The baptism date draws near. You speak with her on the porch one evening, watching the last frost drip from the eaves. You're not doing this to please anyone, are you? You ask. Not because you doubt her, but because it's the only question that matters. She looks at you, face calm, eyes steady. No, she says, I want to belong. You nod. That's enough. And then on the appointed day, surrounded by benches and familiar faces, in a neighbour's home smelling of bread and candles and spring air, she kneels. The preacher pours water over her head 3 times, in the name of the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. She rises not with applause or music or hugs, but with a handshake from every member of the congregation, one by one, silent, sacred, complete. Afterward, she sits with the other newly baptized youth. No one claps, there are no photos, but you can see it, etched on her face, held in her posture. She knows what she's done, what she's promised. She's one of them now, one of you, one with the church, not just in belief, but in belonging. The sun's barely up and you're already halfway down the lane, listening to the soft clop of hooves and the squeak of wooden wheels. It's just you and the open road. And the buggy, of course, pulled by your most stubborn mare, who's decided she'd rather not go anywhere today, thank you very much. You keep your hands light on the reins, muttering to her like she can understand your sighs, because honestly you could use a little peace. You've got business in town, which means breaking the rule you spend most of your life enforcing. Staying away from the world. You're going to market to sell cheese and pick up some nails. Simple enough, but the second you round the bend and leave the line of maple trees behind, you feel it. That tension, that invisible pressure of being seen. The English eyes. Cars whiz past you, their drivers gawking through their windows like they're passing a zoo exhibit. You catch one teenage boy pulling out a camera, probably thinking you're just part of the scenery. Another slice of quaintness for his scrapbook. And here's where things get complicated. Because that buggy you're in, the one rattling its way into town, it wasn't always accepted. In fact, for years, decades even, the buggy was the hot-button issue. That's right. The very thing that defines Amish identity to outsiders, the slow horse-drawn carriage, was once deeply debated. Because not all wheels are created equal, not all changes are welcome. And in the Ordnung, even a wheel can tip the balance between devotion and disobedience. Here's your historical fact. When carriages first became popular in European cities, Some Amish bishops considered them symbols of pride and worldliness. Too fast, too flashy, too similar to the ways of those they had already separated from. For a time, walking or using simple carts was preferred. It wasn't until the community saw how essential buggies were to survival, especially in the New World's sprawling farmland, that they slowly, cautiously became acceptable. But even then, only plain buggies. No colours, no shine, no rubber tyres. Which brings you to today. You pass another buggy on the road, this one black like yours, but with reflectors on the back. Small red triangles tucked just above the axle. Safety, they say. Visibility. Oh. But you know this too was debated. Still is in some districts. Some bishops have allowed them, others haven't. Some say they're necessary for survival in a world filled with speeding trucks. Others say they're a slippery slope to modernity, and here's your quirky fact. In certain Amish settlements, painting your buggy a different shade, even just a slightly glossier black, has gotten people banned from communion. Not forever, but until they repented. That's how seriously the Ordnung treats uniformity. When you see a line of buggies at Sunday service, all identical, you're not just looking at wheels, you're looking at unity, at silent obedience, at people agreeing to let go of individual taste for collective peace. At the market, you keep your head down. You sell your cheese, speak only when spoken to, count your change twice. You overhear the cashier call your buggy cute to her co-worker. You don't respond, you're not angry, just tired. Being noticed wears you down faster than fieldwork. Not because you're ashamed, but because explaining your life to someone who thinks you're playing dress-up is exhausting. On the way home, you spot a teenager, Amish by dress, English by attitude, riding a bicycle with reflectors, wearing bright sneakers that probably came from the English store. He's alone. His hat is crooked. You know his parents, good people, trying hard, but it's obvious he's testing the fence line. And here's the debate. Where's the line between practical adaptation and spiritual compromise? Some say reflectors and flashlights are just tools. Better to live and be safe than die and be pure. Others argue that every allowance becomes a precedent, and soon you're not plain, you're just frugal. They quote stories about how the Mennonites started small and ended with smartphones. You've heard both sides 100 times, maybe more. But here's what you know. It's not about the buggy. It's never really about the buggy. It's about what the buggy represents. Slowness in a fast world, humility in a world built on show, dependence on the old ways even when the new ones scream convenience. When you step into your buggy, you're choosing discomfort on purpose. You're letting the world pass you by. Not because you can't keep up, but because you won't. And that's a kind of courage most people don't recognise. Back home, you pull the mare into the barn and unhitch her slowly, patting her neck while she breathes heavy from the trip. The buggy creaks as you push it back into its spot near the wall, where it will wait, dust settling on the wooden seats, until next time. You check the wheels for splinters, tighten one of the leather straps. It's held together with care, not polish. No one praises you for it, but you do it anyway. You return to the house, the children already gathered for supper. Your daughter asks what town was like. You answer with a shrug, same as always. But before bed, you sit with your wife and speak softly about what you saw. The teenager on the bicycle, the English driver who waved like you were in a parade. The buggy with the reflectors. She listens, doesn't interrupt. Then she says something simple, something you've heard before but always lands differently. We can't keep the world out, but we can choose not to let it in. You nod, because that's what it always comes back to. Choice, not isolation, not arrogance, just faithful, stubborn choosing. One buggy ride at a time. The letter arrives quietly. No one announces it. No one even knocks. It's just there, folded neatly and tucked beneath a jar of blackberry preserves left at the edge of your porch. You find it at dusk, the sky burning orange behind the barn and the chickens half settled into their nightly cluck dreams. You open it slowly, already knowing what it says. There's no signature, no greeting, just 4 lines, handwritten, careful, trembling. I've left. I don't know if I'll return. I love you. Please don't forget me. It's your nephew, the one who always asked too many questions, who lingered near the fence during chores, who once traced the outline of a telephone pole with his eyes like it was the ladder to another world. You always knew he was wrestling with something, but you didn't think he'd go through with it. Not like this, not in the middle of planting season, not without saying goodbye in person. You fold the letter and put it in your pocket like it's something sharp. You don't tell the others right away. You need a moment. Not to cry, you've lived long enough to know that tears rarely help, but to think, because this isn't just a boy running off to chase the world, this is a breach, a tear in the fabric of community, and the Ordnung has clear instructions for what comes next. Shunning, Meidung, silence. You sit by the fire that night, your hands resting on your knees, your thoughts turning slow and heavy. Your wife doesn't speak either. She's thinking of her sister, his mother. She'll be heartbroken, of course. But worse than that, she'll be confused. What more could they have done? What did they miss? And here's your historical fact. Even in the earliest Amish settlements, members who openly rejected the Ordnung or left the community were shunned. Not out of hatred, but out of spiritual discipline. It wasn't just about punishment. It was about preserving the community's purity, protecting the example for others, and extending a silent invitation for return. Because that's what shunning really is. A door that stays closed, but unlocked. You remember the last conversation you had with him? It wasn't even a conversation, really, just a passing moment at a barn raising. He'd asked you what you thought about the Mennonites allowing musical instruments. You'd answered with a shrug. We have hymns, that's enough. He'd nodded, but not like he agreed, like he was filing it away. The next morning you join the bishop and the deacon in the back of the meeting house. They have already heard. News like this doesn't stay quiet long. You sit on a hard bench and talk through it. His age, his decision, his note. They're not angry, just heavy like you. They say the word Meidung like it hurts their mouths, because it always does. And here's the fringe fact. Some communities practiced a special form of shunning known as streng Meidung, strict avoidance. It meant no eating at the same table, no accepting gifts, no doing business, even if it cost you financially. Others took a softer approach, allowing quiet contact for family or letters once a year. But both versions shared the same core, silence as sorrow. The church votes on it that Sunday, after prayer and discussion. Unanimous, as it nearly always is. He has left the community. He has not repented. Therefore, until he returns, he is to be shunned. The bishop makes the announcement with his voice steady, but his hands folded tight. No one speaks after. No one has to. Back home, your children ask questions. Your daughter, just 16, tears in her eyes, says, "But why can't we just write to him, or talk to him?" Your wife answers before you can, "Because we love him." And that's the crux of it. You don't shut him out because you're angry. You shut him out because you hope the silence will speak louder than anything else. Because if he feels the weight of absence, at the table, in the barn, in the prayers he knows are still said for him, maybe he'll remember why he belonged here in the first place. You think about what he's doing now, probably in town, maybe staying with someone who barely knows him. He's probably wearing clothes that fit too well, shoes with rubber soles. He's probably working for someone who tells him, "You're brave for leaving." And maybe for a while he'll believe it. Maybe he'll love the noise, the speed, the freedom. But you also know the quiet will find him eventually. In the space between errands, in the pause after a joke that doesn't land, in the ache of seeing strangers at a table where family used to be. You hope the quiet brings him home. And here's the debate. Is shunning spiritual discipline or social cruelty? Modern scholars argue both sides. Some say it reinforces fear and isolates the vulnerable. Others say it preserves unity and teaches the seriousness of commitment. Within your community, it's never taken lightly. It's not about control, it's about grief and boundaries, and hope that one day reconciliation will be possible. Weeks pass. His name isn't mentioned at meals. His chair stays empty when his family visits. His letters, if they come, are placed in a drawer unopened. His mother cries in the garden sometimes when no one can see. Your children grow quieter when they pass the place he used to sit during church. You keep checking the lane without meaning to. And then one day, your wife finds a small package beside the porch. No note, just a bundle of cloth. Inside is the apron she made for him when he was 10, stitched with a small patch he added himself. A horse, crooked and stitched in dark thread. She sits down hard when she sees it, doesn't speak, just holds it in her lap like something alive. Maybe it's a sign, maybe it's goodbye, maybe it's both. You go about your evening like always, chores, supper, prayer, but before bed you step outside and sit in the dark. The stars above you don't seem to care about the grief you carry. They shine anyway. And maybe that's what gives you peace, that light keeps reaching out even when it feels like it isn't wanted. Because maybe someday he'll look up, and maybe he'll remember. The first time you see it, really see it, is at the gathering after a funeral. It's late spring now. The kind of day where the sky is too blue and the wind too soft for sadness. But here it is anyway, clinging to everyone's shoulders like a second coat. An older man from the district has passed, peacefully, in his sleep as they always hope to. But still, it's a weight. He was steady, faithful, the kind who never missed a Sunday, never muttered when the barn needed repair, never raised his voice louder than a hymn. They bury him in silence. No eulogies, no flowers, just a plain wooden box lowered into the ground with simple ropes, surrounded by black hats and bowed heads. His name is written in your heart, not carved into a stone. That's not the Amish way. He lived simply, he leaves simply, but it's afterward, in the view quiet of your neighbour's house, where it hits you, because you look around and they're still here, after everything. Still plain, still slow, still refusing the easy path. The room is full of black bonnets and rough coats, the scent of fresh bread and sorrow in equal parts. The benches are full. The Ordnung still holds. The children still sit straight. And though the world outside has churned through wars and revolutions and motorcars and machines, this gathering, this silence, this peace, remains. You chew your bread slowly and let the moment settle. Across from you, a boy no older than 7 recites a verse under his breath, preparing for Sunday. Beside him, his mother helps him mouth the harder words, neither of them making a fuss about it. You look to the end of the table and see the preacher, face weathered, hands folded, lost in thought. And you realise you've become him. Not him exactly, but his age, his season. You are now what the young ones look to. That shift is subtle and sudden. Here's your historical fact. Despite persecution, migration, and the churn of modernity, the Amish have retained more than 300 years of cultural and religious tradition largely unchanged. Their refusal to engage with technology, government, and institutionalized education has often baffled outsiders, but it's precisely this resistance that has preserved their way of life when nearly every other communal faith has fractured. And here's your quirky fact. Some Amish families keep memory quilts made of fabric scraps from clothing worn by departed loved ones. Each square tells a story of weddings, of harvests, of days spent in fields or kitchens or barns. They're not displayed, they're not shown to outsiders, but when the days get quiet, they're unfolded, touched, remembered. After the meal, you step outside into the sun, boots crunching over gravel warmed by noon. A few children play silently with a stick and a hoop. Others walk the fence line, watching the cows lazily blink at the sky. You join one of the older men by the barn, lean against the wall and say nothing. It's enough. The silence between two people who've lived the same life often says more than a day's worth of conversation. You talk eventually about ploughing schedules, about a cow with a cough, about your nephew who still hasn't returned. The other man nods, his beard twitching slightly like he might speak on it but thinks better of it. You respect that. Shunning isn't gossip. It's grief. And here's the final debate. How long can the Amish endure? Can a people so tightly bound to tradition survive in a world that never stops inventing new ways to tempt, to distract, to seduce? Some scholars say their numbers will dwindle. Others point to their growing communities, high birth rates and stable retention. But the real answer isn't statistical, it's spiritual. The Ordnung isn't just a rule book. It's a firewall, a filter, a fence not built to keep others out, but to keep something holy in. You walk home with your family that evening, buggies creaking along the road, wheels churning dust and memory behind them. Your wife hums a hymn so softly it sounds like breathing. The children are tired but peaceful, hands swinging, eyes half closed. You catch your daughter glancing at the sky, her mouth forming words silently, maybe a prayer, maybe a verse, maybe just counting clouds. And when you arrive, you find the garden has started blooming again. The beans are sprouting, the tomatoes are stretching taller. You stoop to check the soil, still damp from the last rain, and feel that deep, grounding pull of permanence. The world may burn, may race ahead, may collapse into screens and wires and flashing lights, but you're still here, you and your family and your buggy with its creaking axle, your Ordnung, your prayers, your soft-spoken obedience, the fence lines, the hymnals, the aprons drying on the line. The simplicity that the world mocks until it's dying and then envies with its last breath. You go inside, wash your hands, light a candle, and somewhere in the distance, just beyond the reach of the fields, a young man stands on a hill, watching the sun go down behind your barn. He doesn't walk toward you, not yet, but he sees the light in your window, and maybe, just maybe, he remembers. And now, as we settle back from this long journey through Amish daily life in the 17th century, let's ease the pace. You've walked the muddy roads, hauled water from the pump, sat through sermons that made your legs fall asleep, smelled soap bubbling in kettles, and rocked crying infants by the fire. You've watched children work like adults and adults live like the most disciplined children, always under the Ordnung's steady hand. You've felt the sting of shunning, the hush of funerals, and the rare sweetness of a shared orange on Christmas morning. But look closer. It was never really about barns or benches or buggies. It was about endurance, about choosing slowness when the world screamed speed, about living in obedience, even when obedience meant discomfort. Every small act, the ploughing, the sowing, the bread broken quietly at supper, was part of a larger story, a story that has lasted through centuries, surviving kings, wars, inventions, and the relentless tide of modern life. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't easy. You probably wouldn't survive a month in their shoes, honestly, but the lesson hums underneath it all like a hymn sung too slowly to forget. A simple life, chosen with intention, has a strength that outlasts empires. So tonight, as you lie back in your bed, thankfully not straw-stuffed, maybe let your mind wander just a little. Picture the lantern glow flickering across a plain wooden table. Imagine the sound of a hymn stretching through a farmhouse at dusk. Smell the bread cooling on the windowsill, and then let the quiet wrap around you like one of those hand-stitched quilts. Heavy but comforting. Close your eyes, breathe slow. The Ordnung doesn't need you tonight. Just rest.